Denise found the address before the chicken had gone cold. She sat at the end of her glass dining table, tapping through the county listing on her phone, while Ruth tried to decide whether the rosemary potatoes needed more salt. Walter had said almost nothing since they arrived. The folded deed was in his shirt pocket, making a pale square behind the blue fabric. Wait. Denise leaned closer to the screen. It's really 404 Prosperity Avenue? Eric stopped chewing. Denise's laugh came out in one bright burst. 404 Prosperity. Prosperity not found. Eric covered his mouth, but not before Ruth saw the grin. That's rough. It's perfect, Denise said. The internet error code and the name of the street. It's like the universe wrote a review. Her husband, Mark, lowered his eyes to his plate. Eric took Denise's phone and enlarged the photograph of the duplex. The picture had been taken after rain. Soot streaked the bricks above one downstairs window, and a blue tarp sagged between two broken porch posts. $900, Eric said. Did that include tetanus, or do you have to buy your own? Walter removed the deed from his pocket, folded it once more along the crease, and put it back. Ruth had seen him handle only 3 other pieces of paper that carefully in 51 years: their marriage license, his mother's death certificate, and the notice that ended his job. She set down the salt shaker. We'll send you our new address, she said, when the mailbox is standing. 8 days earlier, the old mailbox had still belonged to someone else. It stood at the end of the Mercer's rented driveway, green paint peeling around the little red flag. Ruth had been carrying grocery bags from the car when she saw the certified envelope bent inside it. She knew it was trouble before she read a word. Good news did not arrive with a barcode and require signature stamped across the front. Their landlord, Mr. Haskell, was selling the house. He had written a polite letter, 90 days' notice, appreciation for their 16 years as reliable tenants, regret about changing circumstances, a sentence reminding them that the refrigerator and washer remained his property, as if Ruth might tuck either one into her purse on the way out. Walter read the letter twice at the kitchen table. Well, he said. That was his word when something hurt too much to name in company. Ruth put away the groceries. She lined the cans in the pantry with their labels facing forward, moved the coffee behind the flour, then moved it back. Through the kitchen window, she could see Walter's tomatoes bowing against their cages. Some were still green. He knew in the spring, she said. Maybe he didn't. He let me plant basil. Walter looked toward the window. That does seem incriminating. She almost laughed. That irritated her more. The house was nothing special. 2 bedrooms, 1 cramped bathroom, aluminum siding the color of oatmeal. Walter had repaired the porch rail, replaced 3 faucets, and built shelves in the laundry alcove without charging Mr. Haskell a dime. Ruth had sewn curtains for windows that still rattled in a hard wind. They had treated the place gently because they expected to grow old there. Apparently they had already done the growing old part. Denise answered on the second ring and said, "Oh, Mom," in the tone she used when a caterer canceled. Within 20 minutes, she had asked about their lease, their savings, Walter's pension, and whether they had considered a more supportive setup. We're looking for another rental, Ruth said. At your age? Ruth glanced at Walter. He was at the sink, washing a clean coffee cup because he needed something to do with his hands. At our age, Denise, landlords still accept checks. That's not what I meant. It usually wasn't. Denise loved her parents fiercely in photographs. She posted old anniversary pictures and called Ruth her moral compass. In person, that compass was often handed a dust cloth. That Saturday, Denise arrived with a legal pad. Eric came 10 minutes late carrying a tray of cinnamon rolls from his restaurant, Mercer's Table, though the restaurant had been named that only after Walter rebuilt half its kitchen for free. They sat in the living room. Denise crossed one elegant ankle over the other and wrote options at the top of the page. There's no reason to panic, she said. We can make this easy. Eric tore a cinnamon roll in half. Rent is stupid right now. So are cinnamon rolls at $11, Walter said. Eric pointed at him. And yet, you ate one. I'm studying the market. For a moment, it felt like an ordinary family visit. Then Denise drew a line down the center of her paper. My guest room is already set up, she said to Ruth. You'd have your own bathroom, and honestly, I'd love the company. Mark travels so much. Ruth looked at the legal pad. Her name was on the left side. Denise turned to Walter. Eric has that finished room behind the restaurant. It's not bad, Eric said. Separate entrance, cable, full-size shower in the employee bathroom. Walter's name went on the right. The room behind Mercer's table had once stored sacks of flour. Walter himself had insulated it after a pipe froze. There was one small window facing a dumpster enclosure. Ruth waited for the rest of the plan. No one spoke. "You mean for a week or two?" she asked. Denise blinked. "For as long as you need." Separately, Eric wiped icing from his thumb, just temporarily, until we figure out what makes sense. Walter's face went still in the way that frightened Ruth more than anger. How often would we be permitted to visit? "Oh, Dad." Denise gave an embarrassed laugh. "Don't make it sound like that." "Like what?" "Like we're splitting you up." Ruth looked from one adult child to the other. They were not cruel people. That was the bewildering part. Denise had once driven 4 hours through freezing rain when Ruth needed gallbladder surgery. Eric called every Sunday, even if he sometimes spent the call asking Walter how to fix something. They loved their parents. They simply loved them the way people loved a sturdy dining set, deeply, sentimentally, and with assumptions about where each piece should fit. Denise touched Ruth's wrist. "You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. That was supposed to be the comfort." Ruth imagined waking in Denise's white guest room beneath pillows no one was allowed to crease. She would wipe the bathroom counter after every use. She would start unloading the dishwasher because it was silly not to. Soon there would be grocery lists on the island and little favors phrased as choices. Across town, Walter would wake to delivery trucks and the restaurant's exhaust fan. He would fix one loose hinge, then another. Eric would call it keeping busy. At night, Ruth and Walter could speak by phone like distant relatives. Walter stood. "Thank you for the roll." Eric looked at the untouched half on his plate. "You're mad?" "No, I've had enough." After they left, Ruth found the legal pad on the couch. Denise had forgotten it. Under options, she had written Mom, guest room/help with house. On the other side, Dad, restaurant/security/maintenance. There was a question mark after maintenance. Ruth carried the page into the kitchen and placed it in front of Walter. He read it without moving his head. Then he made a sound through his nose, not quite a laugh, not quite anything else. "They don't mean it the way it looks," Ruth said. "How does it look?" "Bad." "Then maybe they mean it bad by accident." That was Walter's gift and his flaw. He could forgive people for almost anything, if he could classify the damage as accidental. Ruth had spent years admiring that patience while quietly cleaning up after it. She folded the paper and put it beneath the certified letter. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To check the rental listings." She found Prosperity Avenue just after midnight. The county land bank website looked as if it had been designed by someone who disliked both color and visitors. Most properties had already been marked for demolition. A few were empty lots. The duplex at 404, Prosperity appeared halfway down the page beneath a flat-roofed garage and above a narrow house with a tree growing through its porch. Minimum bid, $500. Estimated rehabilitation, $32,000, $40,000. Occupancy prohibited pending inspection. 18-month compliance deadline. Ruth studied the photographs. The fire appeared to have been contained in the rear downstairs room. The roofline did not sag. The bricks were ugly with soot but mostly straight. Walter came in wearing his robe and one sock. "You planning to buy the courthouse?" "Come look at this." He leaned over her shoulder. Ruth felt his attention sharpen. He clicked through the photographs, enlarged the foundation, went back to the roof, and stared at the basement joists. "That porch is gone," he said. "I noticed. Electrical too, probably." "I assumed the fire did not improve it." He gave her a sideways look. "Neighborhood's rough, so is Denise's guest mattress." He sat beside her. They drove past the duplex the next afternoon without telling anyone. Prosperity Avenue ran 6 blocks from the abandoned paper mill toward the river. Half the houses were occupied and tended. The others seemed to be waiting for a decision. At 404, waist-high weeds pushed through a chain-link fence. The duplex was narrower than it looked online, with 2 front doors beneath the same wounded porch roof. Walter parked across the street. "Windows are wrong," he said. "What's wrong with them?" "Replacement vinyl, cheap ones. But whoever put them in measured right." Ruth looked at him. A ringing endorsement. The back addition took the fire. Main structure might be all right. Might? Might is expensive. They sat there long enough for a city bus to pass twice. A woman in a red coat slowed on the sidewalk and studied their car. Walter raised 2 fingers in greeting. After a moment, she did the same. "What would we do with 2 apartments?" Ruth asked. "Live in one and the other, not live in it?" She laughed then, and this time she was grateful. The auction was held 4 days later in a county conference room that smelled of carpet cleaner and old coffee. Ruth expected competition. Instead, the investors ignored 404 prosperity. One man muttered that the sewer line alone could eat 10 grand. Another said the block was years away from turning around, if it ever did. Walter squeezed Ruth's hand once beneath the table. They had agreed on a ceiling of $1,000. They had also agreed they could still walk away after the opening bid. Ruth believed both agreements right up until the auctioneer asked for $500 and the room went silent. She raised her number. A contractor near the aisle bid $700 without looking up from his phone. "8," Ruth said. Walter turned toward her. The contractor finally looked over. He saw her gray hair, Walter's careful posture, and apparently decided he did not need the aggravation. "900, he said. Ruth raised her number again. The auctioneer scanned the room. 900 going once, going twice. The gavel was only a small wooden block, but the sound landed in Ruth's chest. Outside, Walter stood on the courthouse steps holding the purchase packet. "We own a condemned duplex," he said. "We do. We're not allowed inside it. Not yet. It doesn't have plumbing. You always complain that I take too long in the bathroom." He stared at her, then began to laugh. Ruth joined him, though her knees had started shaking. They laughed until people edged around them on the steps. Now, at Denise's dining table, nobody was laughing with them. After Ruth's remark about the mailbox, silence settled over the plates. Denise picked up her wineglass, then put it down untouched. "Mom, I'm trying to understand," she said. "Why would you do this?" Ruth looked at Walter. He gave the smallest shrug, leaving the answer to her. She could have mentioned the rents they could not afford, the 2 apartments, the straight brick walls, or the 18-month deadline already ticking. She could have placed Denise's forgotten legal pad on the glass table between them. Instead, Ruth reached for a cold potato. "Because," she said, "your father and I still prefer the same address." Denise's mouth tightened. "That is not fair." Ruth cut the potato in half. It squeaked beneath her knife. "I didn't say you wanted us to have different addresses. You implied it. I said what your plan required. It wasn't a plan, it was an option." Walter glanced toward the legal pad beside Denise's elbow. She had brought a fresh one to dinner. It had columns. Mark coughed into his napkin. Eric looked down, but Ruth saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Denise pressed both palms to the table. "I was trying to help before this became a crisis. Instead, you 2 ran off to an auction and bought a burned building without telling anyone." "We told each other," Ruth said. "You know what I mean." "Yes," Ruth said. "I generally do." That landed harder than she intended. Denise sat back as if her mother had reached across the table and pushed her. Ruth wanted to retrieve the words, soften them, offer some small domestic service that would let everyone pretend the evening had gone normally. She nearly asked whether Denise wanted help with the dishes. Then Eric picked up the phone again. "Is that the only picture?" he asked. "There are 17, Denise said. "The back looks worse. Let me see." They bent over the screen together. Ruth watched their expressions change from amusement to concern, and then to a kind of appalled fascination. It was the same look people wore when passing a wreck slowly enough to see the damage. Eric enlarged one of the county photographs. "Is that daylight through the kitchen ceiling?" "Rear utility room," Walter said. "And yes, you bought a house where the ceiling has resigned. Part of the ceiling." Dad. Walter's patience, usually broad enough to drive a truck through, narrowed. "You were willing to put me in a room with one window facing your grease trap. That was temporary. So's a hole in a roof if you fix it." Eric dropped the phone onto the table. "I wasn't insulting you." "No? You asked if the building came with tetanus. That was a joke." Walter nodded. "Then I'm glad one of us is enjoying himself." Mark began collecting plates. Denise immediately told him to leave them, which caused him to collect them faster. Ruth put her hand on Walter's forearm. The muscle beneath his sleeve was tight. She did not want him defending the duplex as though it had already earned their loyalty. They had owned it for less than a week. It had not yet provided so much as a dry chair. "We know what we bought," she said. Denise looked at her. "Do you?" The honest answer was not entirely. "They left before dessert." Denise followed them through the entryway carrying Ruth's cardigan, though Ruth was already wearing it. "Mom, wait." Walter continued to the car. Eric stayed inside, visible through the narrow window beside the door, one hand on his hip. Denise lowered her voice. "I'm worried about Dad." Ruth watched Walter unlock the passenger door for her out of 51 years of habit. He had started doing it when she was 22 and never noticed when every car in America began unlocking with a button. "I worry about him too. He's 76. I know. I was at 75 of the birthdays. This isn't funny." "No." Denise stepped closer. Her perfume smelled like oranges and something expensive. "He thinks he can still do what he did 20 years ago. That would be a problem if I let him. You couldn't stop him when you were 30. Ruth had to give her that. "I've improved. I'm serious. That building could kill him. A porch could collapse. Mold could hide behind walls. A bad wire could wake up in a wet junction box and turn one foolish touch into a funeral." Ruth had imagined every version since the gavel fell. She had imagined Walter on a ladder, Walter beneath a beam, Walter saying he was fine in the tone that meant he could not feel 2 fingers. But Denise's fear came wrapped in the same assumption as her offer, that Ruth would stand nearby holding a casserole while Walter decided everything. "We're getting professionals where we need them," Ruth said. "And if he behaves like an idiot, I'll tell him. What if he doesn't listen? Then I'll tell him louder." Denise's face softened for an instant. "You really want to live there?" Ruth looked past her toward the dining room. Eric had picked up the phone again. Mark was scraping plates into the trash. "I really don't want to live here." Denise flinched. "I didn't mean your house," Ruth said. "I mean inside other people's arrangements." She kissed her daughter's cheek before Denise could answer. Walter waited until they had driven 2 blocks before saying, "That potato line was good." "What potato line?" "The same address line. That had nothing to do with potatoes. You were holding one." Ruth turned toward the window so he would not see her smile. At home, the certified letter still lay on the kitchen table beneath Denise's first legal pad. Walter hung his keys on the little wooden rack he had made when they moved in. There were 16 small scratches in the wall beside it, one for each year of missing the hook in the dark. Ruth removed her earrings. "Denise thinks the building will kill you. She's been reading the listing. She's not entirely wrong." "No." The quick agreement disturbed her more than resistance would have. Walter opened the refrigerator, stared inside, and closed it without taking anything. Joyce looked sound in the pictures. Pictures taken by a county employee who did not want to enter the building still looked sound. "We're not trusting your life to look sound." He leaned against the counter. "I'm not trying to die in a duplex, Ruth. You'd call it an accident." He stared at her. She regretted the words, but not the fear beneath them. "You climb things you shouldn't. You lift things because asking for help takes too long. You think pain is a private hobby. That's a lot of complaints for one evening. I've been saving them." He rubbed his thumb across a nick in the countertop. "We can walk away. The land bank would retain their deposit and reclaim the property if they failed to meet the initial conditions. $900 was not ruinous, though it was not nothing. Walking away would cost them less than 1 month's rent in most of the listings Ruth had found. "You want to?" she asked. "No, neither do I." Walter looked relieved enough to anger her. "But we do it with estimates," she continued. "Real ones. Electrical, roof, sewer, everything. We hire what we cannot safely do. You don't get on the roof. I can inspect a roof. You can inspect it from the ground with binoculars. That's bird watching. Then tell me if it has feathers." 2 mornings later, they entered 404 Prosperity Avenue for the first time. The land bank had changed the front lock, though the new key resisted as if the house had developed standards. Walter worked it gently while Ruth stood on the porch in a paper mask and work gloves. The porch decking flexed beneath her shoes. "Should it do that?" she asked. "No." Comforting. The door opened 6 inches and struck something. Walter squeezed through, moved a fallen strip of trim, and let Ruth in. The smell came first. Wet ash, old wood, mouse droppings, and a sour sweetness Ruth could not place. Their flashlights moved across a narrow hallway. Blistered paint curled from the wall in delicate chips. The ceiling medallion above the entry had survived, though the light fixture hung from its wires like a dead flower. The front room was full of what previous occupants had abandoned. A broken floor lamp, 2 kitchen chairs, a swollen cardboard box of paperback romances. Someone had left a mug on the mantel. It said, "Mondays are optional." Ruth picked it up by the handle. Optimist, Walter said. The floors surprised her. Beneath the dirt, the oak boards ran straight toward tall front windows. The fireplace had been sealed with plywood, and a stain traveled down one wall from the roof. Walter crouched near the baseboard. Don't touch anything, Ruth said. I'm looking. You look with your hands. He stood again, chastened for almost 4 seconds. The damage worsened toward the rear. The downstairs kitchen had lost most of its ceiling. Charred studs showed where the utility room joined the house, and melted plastic clung to an outlet. Rain had entered through the damaged roof and buckled the linoleum into stiff gray waves. Ruth stopped in the doorway. Online, the room had been a rectangle of pixels. Standing inside it, she could hear water tapping into a metal pot someone had placed beneath the leak. Each drop seemed to cost money. Walter aimed his flashlight upward. His jaw shifted. How bad? She asked. I don't know yet. You always have a number. I have several. I don't like any of them. That frightened her, but she appreciated the truth. A board creaked outside. Ruth turned so fast her flashlight struck Walter's shoulder. A woman in a red coat stood beyond the broken back door. She was the woman they had seen from the car. Up close she appeared near Ruth's age, with silver threaded through her dark hair and a transit authority badge clipped to her belt. You the auction people? She asked. We're the people, Ruth said. Auction remains under review. The woman's gaze moved over their masks, gloves, and flashlights. You planning to tear it down? No, Walter said. You planning to cover everything in gray plastic flooring and charge $1,400 a month? Walter looked at Ruth. Were we? We had not reached gray plastic in our discussions. The woman did not smile. She stepped carefully over the threshold and pointed toward the ruined utility room. Main water shutoff isn't in the basement like the county sheet says. It's behind that wall, under the little iron door. If you open the wrong valve downstairs, you'll flood what's left. How do you know? Ruth asked. I lived here 19 years. Her name was Celia Alvarez. She had occupied the downstairs apartment until the electrical fire, which started while she was working a late dispatch shift. By the time she returned, the street was full of engines and the rear windows were black. The former owner, Mavis Pritchard, had already been ill. The condemnation finished what age and unpaid bills had begun. Celia spoke plainly, without asking for sympathy. She showed them where the floor dipped near the pantry and warned them that the second basement step was loose. Before leaving, she glanced toward the yard. Mavis planted peonies along that fence, she said. They'll look dead this time of year. They're not. Ruth followed her outside. Ms. Alvarez. Celia turned. When we know what we're doing, could we call you? There may be things about the house that aren't on any county sheet. There are always things. Celia took a bus schedule from her coat pocket, wrote a number across it, and handed it over. That address is stubborn. So are we, Ruth said. This time Celia smiled. Walter was waiting in the front hall when Ruth returned. He had found the brass house numbers in a pile beneath the radiator. A 4, a 0, and another 4, blackened but intact. He held them across his palm. Mailbox first, he asked. Roof first. Denise won't enjoy that answer. We're not fixing the house in order of Denise. Ruth took the numbers from him. Soot came away on her glove, but beneath it the brass caught a narrow strip of afternoon light. Ruth washed the brass numbers in a mixing bowl that night. Soot loosened in black ribbons beneath the warm water. Walter sat at the table with a yellow pad, writing columns of figures. Every few minutes he crossed out a number and replaced it with one that made his mouth flatten. You're going to wear through the paper, Ruth said. I'm adjusting. Are the numbers getting smaller? They're getting more informed. That means bigger. Walter drew a line beneath the final column. Their savings amounted to a little over $46,000. Ruth's pension from the pharmacy was modest, Walter's was better, and Social Security covered their ordinary expenses if ordinary behaved itself. The $900 purchase had been easy. Making the building legal enough to sleep in would not be. Walter tapped the pad. If the roof stays under 8 and electrical under 6, we can do it. You haven't included plumbing. Not yet. Windows. Most of those are usable. Permits. I wrote permits. You wrote 1,200. Is that permits or a very disappointing vacation? He turned the pad around. Permits. Ruth dried the 0 with a dish towel. The brass was scratched and pitted, but the soot had not permanently stained it. She set it beside the 2 4s on the counter. What about a reserve? She asked. We have room. Where? He pointed to the bottom of the page where he had written MISC, $2,500. Ruth stared at him. That is not a reserve. That is an apology. $2,500 is money, not to a condemned building. She took the pad and added a new line. Do not touch. $8,000. Walter made a wounded sound. That leaves us $38,000, she said. That doesn't leave us enough. Then the house will have to disappoint you. Over the next 6 days, it did. The first roofer refused to climb past the porch. He stood in the yard, looked up, and announced that the entire roof needed replacement for $14,000. You didn't inspect it, Walter said. I inspected enough. You inspected it from beside your truck. The roofer shrugged. You want me to find cheaper damage? The second roofer used a ladder, took photographs, and found that the fire-damaged rear section required rebuilding, but the main roof could be repaired. His estimate came to $9,200. The third said $87, then added enough qualifications to make Ruth imagine rain entering through every comma. The plumber found galvanized supply lines and cast iron drains old enough to have opinions. He quoted $6,800 if the main sewer connection behaved. When Ruth asked how likely that was, he said, At this address? She waited. He cleared his throat. We'd need to camera it. Then camera it. The basement cleanout was blocked by debris, so that answer would have to wait. Walter received each estimate as a personal challenge. He walked through the duplex with contractors, asking precise questions and refusing vague answers. At night, he rewrote his columns. Ruth watched their available money shrink while Walter's list of tasks for himself grew. Remove damaged plaster, rebuild rear partition, repair porch decking, refinish floors, salvage cabinets. You cannot personally wrestle the house into affordability, she said. I'm not wrestling. You're making a list of opponents. He looked down at the yellow pad. Cabinets aren't opponents. You haven't met those cabinets. Their landlord stopped by on Friday with a prospective buyer. Mr. Haskell had the decency to look uncomfortable. The buyer had no such weakness. She opened cupboards without asking, photographed the bathroom, and talked about knocking out the wall between the kitchen and dining room, while Ruth stood 2 feet away holding a box labeled winter clothes. We're still living here, Ruth said. The buyer lowered her phone. Of course. Then she photographed the pantry. Walter remained in the garage, sorting tools into keep, sell, and take now piles. Ruth found him wrapping the cord of a circular saw with excessive concentration. Woman wants to remove the kitchen wall, she said. Load-bearing. I hope it lands on her pantry. He glanced toward the house. Haskell say anything about an extension? No. Buyer wants possession on schedule. Walter tightened the cord until his knuckles paled. Their 90 days had seemed generous when the letter arrived. Now each one felt rented by the hour. On Saturday morning, they met Sam Boone at the duplex. Sam and Walter had known each other for almost 30 years, though neither would have called the other a close friend. Sam had handled electrical contracts at several of the public schools Walter maintained. He was 62, broad through the chest, and wore his remaining gray hair in a ponytail that made Denise once describe him as a roadie for a band nobody remembers. His divorce had left him with a work van, half a set of cookware, and an old commercial shop near the railroad tracks. He was trying to reopen the shop after letting it sit mostly unused for 2 years. Sam removed the service panel cover and made a low whistle. That good? Ruth asked. It's communication. With whom? The dead. Walter leaned closer. Federal Pacific? Some of it. Other parts may have been assembled during a bar bet. Sam traced the ruined circuits without touching them. He inspected the melted wiring near the utility room, then checked the upstairs panel. Unlike the first roofer, he did not perform concern for them. He simply told them what had to be removed, what could remain temporarily, and what the code required before power could be restored. At the front door, he wrote a figure on his estimate pad. $7,400. Walter read it. Labor? 42. I can pull wire. Sam looked at his hands, not unkindly. You can pull some wire. I can do more than some. Ruth stepped between the beginning of an argument that had probably started in 1998. He can also fill out no permit applications and sign no inspection forms, which is why we called you. Sam's mustache moved. Still keeping him out of trouble? No. I've reduced my goals. He tore off the estimate, then hesitated. I could knock 1,500 off. Walter's eyes narrowed. For what? The old conduit threader at my shop? Motors seized. You rebuilt the same model at Franklin. That one had a split-gear housing. This one doesn't. You took it apart? I opened it. That isn't the same thing. Sam pointed at him. Exactly why I need you. Ruth read the estimate again. $1,500 mattered. So did the possibility that Walter would spend 3 unpaid weeks resurrecting a machine worth half that. How many hours? She asked. Sam looked surprised. His labor, Ruth said. How many hours are you buying? Walter started to speak. She raised one finger. Sam scratched the side of his neck. 20, maybe 25. At $60 an hour, 25 is $1,500. You his union rep now? I kept books for 37 years. Everybody has a union when I'm holding a pencil. Sam smiled and wrote the arrangement on the estimate. 25 hours maximum. Electrical work reduced by 1,500. Additional hours subject to agreement. Walter read it twice. You don't trust us? I don't trust that machine, Ruth said. They shook hands. Eric arrived while they were clearing the downstairs front room. He parked his restaurant van at the curb and stood outside long enough to take in the chain-link fence, blackened rear wall, and rental dumpster. I thought the pictures were bad, he said. They were flattering. Ruth handed him a dust mask. I can't stay. Then you can look dirty for a shorter period. He took the mask, but did not put it on. Walter was inside, prying a length of water-swollen baseboard from the wall. Eric watched him through the doorway. Walk-in freezer is making that noise again. Walter did not turn around. Which noise? The grinding one. Fan motor. That's what you said last time. It was the fan motor last time. You think you could come by? Walter pulled another nail. Sam's Cooling has a service number on the unit. Eric gave a short laugh. They charge just to show up. Yes. The single word altered the air. Eric looked at Ruth, expecting translation. She busied herself folding the top of a trash bag over. It would take you 20 minutes, he said to Walter. Then they won't charge much. Seriously? Walter set down the pry bar. Seriously. Eric's face reddened. I came over here to see if you needed anything. You arrived without gloves and said you couldn't stay. I have a business to run. So did the people who gave us estimates. Ruth wanted to intervene. Habit rose inside her like a hand reaching for a light switch. She could tell Walter to help just this once. She could tell Eric his father was tired. She could make each man less responsible for what he had said. Instead, she held out the second dust mask. Eric stared at it. 20 minutes, she said. For what? That's what you said the freezer would take. You can give us 20 minutes, too. He looked toward his van, then at the ruined room. What do you want me to do? Ruth handed him a pair of work gloves. They filled 6 contractor bags. Eric complained about the smell, the dust, and the fact that Walter rejected almost everything he tried to throw away. When he picked up the Monday mug, Ruth stopped him. That stays. It's chipped. It belongs to somebody. In a condemned house? People can own things in condemned houses. Eric looked at her, then carefully set the mug on the mantel. He stayed 43 minutes. Before leaving, he stood beside Walter on the sidewalk. Ruth could not hear what they said. Eric gestured once toward the restaurant van, and Walter shook his head. A moment later, Eric nodded. It was not agreement exactly, but it lacked the sharpness of defeat. Celia appeared after lunch wearing work pants instead of her red coat. She carried a thermos, 3 sandwiches, and a pair of heavy gloves. I brought back rent, she said. Ruth held up the mug. Celia's stern expression cracked. You found Monday. It seemed important. It was Mavis's. She hated Mondays because she worked Tuesdays through Saturdays. Walter examined the chip. She sounds principled. Celia poured coffee into paper cups and showed them which abandoned furniture had belonged to Mavis, which had been Celia's, and which had appeared after the building was boarded. She did not ask permission before working. She opened windows that would open, swept broken plaster into piles, and corrected Walter when he tried to force the pantry door. It swells at the bottom, she said. Lift, then pull. The door opened. Walter gave her an approving glance. You could have mentioned that before I took the hinges off. You could have asked before you took the hinges off. By late afternoon, the dumpster was half full. The front room stood empty except for the mantel mug and 3 brass numbers Ruth had placed on the sill. Without the broken furniture and soggy boxes, the room looked larger and somehow more damaged. Cracks showed, stains spread. Every defect had room to introduce itself. Ruth's back ached. Walter's limp had deepened, though he denied limping when she mentioned it. Celia sat on the porch step, eating the last half of a sandwich. "You still think you bought a house?" she asked. Ruth looked through the open door, across the scarred floor, toward the place where the ceiling had burned away. "No," she said. "I think we bought the work." Celia nodded as if that were the right answer. On Monday, the work began billing them for its introduction. The roofing company called to report another band of rot beneath the rear shingles. Sam needed the city to relocate the meter before he could install the new service. The plumber discovered that someone had poured concrete around the downstairs toilet flange, apparently in the belief that plumbing responded to intimidation. Ruth kept a notebook in her purse. Red ink meant paid, blue meant estimated, and black meant Walter believed he could do it himself. By Wednesday, the black ink covered 2 pages. "You wrote remove chimney cap," she said. Walter continued spooning oatmeal into his mouth. "The chimney cap is on the roof. It's on the chimney." "Which is where? The roof is not involved in removing it. Did it float up there independently?" He swallowed. "The roofer said I could use his scaffold. You told me you wouldn't get on the roof. A scaffold isn't a roof." Ruth closed the notebook. "This marriage is too old for you to begin practicing law." He gave her a long look, then drew a line through chimney cap. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she watched him study the black entries, looking for another way to make himself worth the expense. They spent mornings packing the rental house and afternoons on Prosperity Avenue. Their lives divided into boxes: kitchen, bathroom, records, Walter's side of the closet, Ruth's side, give away, sell, no idea. The no idea pile became the largest. Mr. Haskell's buyer measured rooms around them. Every visit produced another small indignity. One afternoon, Ruth came home to find blue painter's tape on the wall, where the buyer intended to hang cabinets. Another day, the woman left flooring samples spread across the kitchen table. Ruth stacked them neatly in the sink. Walter came in carrying an empty tool case. "What's that?" "The future. Waterproof." "We can find out." He rescued the samples before she turned on the faucet, but only because Mr. Haskell had always been kind until kindness became inconvenient. Denise offered to hire movers. Ruth accepted before pride could make the decision expensive. Denise sounded pleased, then immediately asked where the movers should take everything. "Storage, mostly." "And where are you sleeping?" "We found a room." "What kind of room?" "The rectangular kind." "Mom?" The room was on the second floor of a converted house near downtown, furnished with a double bed, a narrow dresser, and a kitchenette whose refrigerator made a noise like a distant lawnmower. The bathroom was private if one ignored the door's refusal to latch. Rent was month to month. The landlady, a retired court reporter named June Paskett, had warned them that the radiator sometimes banged. Walter said they had raised 2 adult children and would not be frightened by a radiator. Denise was. She arrived to inspect the room, carrying a new set of sheets, and stood in the doorway with the expression she had worn at 404 Prosperity. "You cannot stay here." "We already paid," Ruth said. "The bed touches the wall. Most beds do somewhere, both sides." Walter set a box of coffee mugs on the kitchenette counter. "Prevents wandering." Denise ignored him. "Come to my house, both of you. We'll rearrange Mark's office." The offer should have softened Ruth. It was what they had wanted Denise to say in the first place. Both of you. Yet the invitation came only after their alternative looked sufficiently uncomfortable. "We have a room," Ruth said. "You have a closet with a hot plate, a closet where your father is welcome." Denise crossed her arms. "Are you going to punish me forever because I suggested something practical?" "No." "How long then?" Ruth looked at the sheets in Denise's hands. They were pale blue, a color Denise had once said made Ruth look rested. Ruth took them. "Until you stop calling every choice we make a punishment for you." Denise's eyes filled before she could turn away. She left without seeing the bathroom. Ruth carried the sheets to the bed and sat down. Walter opened the cabinet above the sink. 1 plate. June said she'd bring another. 1 fork. "We can take turns." He shut the cabinet. "You could have gone with her." Ruth looked up. "Do you want me to?" "No." "Then why say it?" "Because this room is awful." "It is. You'd be more comfortable there, without you." He placed both hands on the kitchenette counter. "I don't want you uncomfortable on principle. I'm not here on principle." What are you here on? Ruth shook out the new fitted sheet. Help me make the bed. They discovered the mattress was 6 inches wider than the frame, causing it to slope toward the middle. That first night, they rolled together in their sleep and woke with Walter's elbow against Ruth's nose. Romantic, he murmured. You're bleeding. So are you. I'm considering it. The radiator began banging at 3 in the morning. At Prosperity Avenue, progress had its own noises. Hammers struck from the rear roof. Sam's drill whined through floor joists. The dumpster company lifted one full container away and left another before Ruth arrived with coffee. Walter spent 3 mornings at Sam's shop, dismantling the seized conduit threader. He returned each afternoon, smelling of machine oil, and carrying one more explanation of why 25 hours might not be enough. You agreed to 25, Ruth reminded him. I agreed to fix the machine. No. Sam agreed to buy 25 hours. The motor bearings are frozen. They can thaw on Sam's time. You don't thaw bearings. You know what I mean. Walter did, but the machine had already hooked him. Ruth could see it in the way he described the parts over dinner. Unlike the Duplex, the threader was a problem small enough to understand. A shaft was straight, or it was not. A bearing turned or refused. Houses concealed their trouble behind walls and beneath floors. Machines had the decency to place failure where a patient man could eventually touch it. Ruth visited the shop on his 4th morning. Sam had cleared one workbench, but little else. Coils of wire hung from hooks. Old motors sat in rows on the floor, each tagged with a strip of masking tape. The conduit threader occupied the center of the room like a patient during surgery. Walter stood over it wearing magnifying glasses that made his eyes look enormous. 22 hours, Ruth said. Sam checked the clock on the wall. 21 and a half, Walter pointed at him. You said coffee didn't count. It counts if you criticize how I make it. Sam showed Ruth the electrical permit, the materials receipt, and an updated schedule. His figures matched hers to the dollar. She felt a small, unreasonable relief. What happens when his hours are gone? She asked. I finish the machine or I don't. Walter removed the magnifying glasses. It'll be finished. Sam leaned toward Ruth. He's bossy when you lend him to people. I didn't lend him. You leased him. Does he come with maintenance records? No one has ever successfully maintained him. Walter put the glasses back on and muttered something about being surrounded by comedians. Ruth left them arguing over a bearing puller. The rear roof cost $1,800 more than estimated. The project manager showed Ruth photographs of the rot, each one perfectly clear and financially offensive. The damage had traveled farther along the wall plate than anyone could see from above. They could cover it and hope, he said, but he would not recommend it. Neither would I, Walter said. Ruth opened her notebook. The $8,000 reserve remained untouched in a separate account. She had imagined guarding it until the final inspection, a small wall against panic. Instead, she wrote the first red figure beneath, "Do not touch," $1,800. Walter watched the pen move. We could delay the upstairs bathroom, he said. We need a bathroom. Downstairs will work. Downstairs is supposed to become a separate apartment. Eventually, Ruth looked through the ruined kitchen toward the front room. Celia was scraping loose paint from a window sash. She had begun appearing twice a week, usually with coffee and no announcement. They had not discussed the future of the downstairs apartment. Every time Ruth considered bringing it up, the building seemed to produce another urgent demand. Both bathrooms stay, she said. We'll save somewhere else. She saved on tile first. A warehouse outside town sold discontinued materials by the pallet. Ruth spent 2 hours among dusty boxes while a salesman tried to steer her toward beige ceramic squares. This one is popular with landlords, he said. I'm going to live there. He switched to a more expensive display. Ruth found matte white tile for the bathrooms, dark green for the downstairs kitchen backsplash, and 3 unopened boxes of a small black and white pattern that nobody had ordered enough of to use. The lots did not match perfectly. She bought them anyway. Denise saw the boxes in the group chat Walter had created to share renovation photographs. Dark green, she wrote. That will make the kitchen look smaller. Ruth placed the phone face down. A minute later, Eric replied, Looks good to me. Then another message appeared. Freezer fan cost me $312, Dad. You were right. Walter read it over Ruth's shoulder. Is that an apology? She asked. No. Could be the first payment on one. He typed back, Keep the old motor. Sam may rebuild it. Ruth laughed. You're incapable of letting anything die. Some things are only stuck. The roofers finished on a gray Thursday afternoon. They removed the last tarp, sealed the flashing, and swept nails from the yard with a magnetic roller. The rear addition still had open walls, and the house remained dark after sunset, but for the first time since the auction, its roof was whole. Rain began that night. In their rented room, it rattled against the window and woke Ruth at 1. The radiator answered with 3 hard bangs. Walter lay awake beside her. "You thinking about it?" she asked. "Maybe. Me too." They dressed without discussing whether the trip was sensible. Walter drove through shining streets while Ruth held the keys and listened to the rain strengthen. At 404 Prosperity, they entered with flashlights and stood in the downstairs front room. Water moved through the new gutters outside. It tapped leaves, hissed on pavement, and drummed softly against the porch roof. Inside, nothing dripped. Walter aimed his flashlight at the ceiling stain. It remained dark and dry. They checked the kitchen, the rear wall, the upstairs rooms, and every window. No pans filled, no plaster darkened. For 10 minutes they wandered through the unheated duplex, searching for water, and finding none. Back in the front room, Walter switched off his flashlight. Ruth did the same. The darkness was complete, but the house sounded different. Rain pressed against it from every side, and the walls held. Walter reached for her hand. Ruth stood beside him in the dry dark and let the building keep one promise. They stayed until the cold reached through their coats. On the drive back, Walter kept one hand on the wheel and the other curled loosely around Ruth's. Neither mentioned that the room on Prosperity Avenue was still too dirty to sit in. For one wet hour, it had felt more like home than the bed waiting for them downtown. 3 days later, Sam turned on the power. He did it without ceremony. Ruth expected sparks, a hum, perhaps some visible sign that the house had accepted the arrangement. Sam simply moved the new main breaker and told Walter to try the front switch. Walter pressed it. A bare bulb glowed above the entry. The light was ugly, too white, and suspended from an orange temporary cord. Ruth loved it immediately. It showed every crack in the plaster and every ridge of dirt they had failed to sweep. She could see Walter's face without a flashlight. "Look at that," he said. "I am." "Not bad. The bulb, the wiring." Sam snorted from the new service panel. "You're welcome." His conduit threader had been repaired in 26 hours and 40 minutes. Ruth knew because she had checked. Sam claimed he had stopped counting after 25. Walter claimed the remaining time had been a social visit. The machine, indifferent to accounting, cut clean threads. Ruth paid Sam the reduced amount and brought him a pie from the bakery near their rented room. "You know this doesn't cover 40 minutes, he said. "It covers the part where you pretend 40 minutes was all he gave you." Sam considered that and handed back the pie. "Take him home." With power restored, the duplex began to change more quickly. Work lights brightened the rear rooms. Fans dried damp framing. Walter repaired window sashes at a folding table, while Ruth stripped layers of shelf paper from the upstairs cabinets. The oldest layer had yellow daisies printed on it. Beneath that was a pattern of red cherries. Beneath the cherries, someone had lined the shelves with newspaper from 1989. Celia read the date and said, Mavis believed shelf paper was a structural material. "She may have built the porch," Walter said. Celia gave him a look. "Mavis hired men to build the porch. Then she spent 20 years explaining how they did it wrong." Ruth liked hearing about the house before it became damage. Mavis had kept a radio beside the kitchen sink. She had made coffee too strong and refused to replace a refrigerator that hummed loudly because, according to Celia, humming proved it was working. The upstairs tenant before the fire had been a traveling nurse who kept odd hours and once painted the bedroom lavender without permission. "That's not lavender," Ruth said, scraping a loose patch. "That's the color of expired ham." Celia laughed so suddenly she had to sit on the counter. The laughter made it easier for Ruth to ask what she had been avoiding. "When the downstairs is finished," she said, "would you want to come back?" Celia's smile disappeared. She looked toward the front room. "I'm not promising a date," Ruth continued. "I'm not even promising a floor without holes yet. But you know the place, and you've put in work." Celia folded the scraper's metal edge into the handle. "I can pay rent. I assumed you could. I don't need a favor. I didn't offer one. You mentioned the work. Because work matters. It doesn't mean free rent." Celia studied her. "What would you charge?" Ruth named a figure lower than the neighborhood's renovated units, but high enough to cover taxes, insurance, and a portion of future repairs. She had calculated it 2 nights earlier, then recalculated it because the first number felt too much like hope. Celia nodded once. If you put it in writing, I put everything in writing. So I've heard. She glanced toward Walter, who was sanding a window sash while wearing the magnifying glasses from Sam's shop. He complains about the notebook, Celia said. He'll survive it. Walter looked up. I can hear both of you. That's the new wiring, Ruth said. Improved reception. Celia agreed to consider the apartment once they had a reliable completion date. No handshake, no emotional declaration. She picked up the scraper and returned to the cabinet. Ruth trusted her more for that. Denise came by the following Sunday with sandwiches wrapped in white paper and a tray of cut fruit. She wore old jeans that had been professionally distressed in places no work had ever distressed Ruth's clothing. Mark stayed home. The duplex surprised her. Ruth watched Denise step into the lit front hall and look upward. The ceiling medallion had been cleaned. Walter had rehung the Monday mug on a temporary shelf above the mantel. Fresh joists framed the repaired rear ceiling. It doesn't smell as bad, Denise said. Thank you, Walter replied. We've been working toward less smell. Denise walked from room to room, touching nothing. In the downstairs kitchen, she noticed the dark green tile stacked against the wall. It's prettier in person. Ruth accepted this revision without comment. Where will you live? Denise asked. Upstairs. So, this is a rental? When it's done, to whom? Ruth hesitated just long enough for Denise to see it. Celia may take it. The bus woman, the bus dispatcher. You barely know her. I knew Mr. Haskell 16 years. Denise looked toward the ruined utility room. That's different. How? He owned your house. That didn't make him family. Denise put the sandwich bag on an overturned bucket. I didn't say it did. Ruth heard the old strain returning and turned away. Turkey or tuna? I brought both. They ate sitting on stacked drywall. Denise managed half a sandwich before brushing dust from her jeans. I'm having people over Thursday, she said. Nothing major? I thought you might help me arrange the dining room. You're better at making the table look warm. Ruth chewed slowly. Denise added, only if you're free. The phrase had arrived late enough to reveal the original sentence. I'm not, Ruth said. You're here every day? Most days. I meant Thursday evening. So did I. Denise set down her sandwich. You don't have to say no just because I asked badly. I'm saying no because I'm tired. I could pick you up. I would still be tired in your car. Walter studied his sandwich as if the turkey held a private message. Denise's eyes went to him, then back to Ruth. You used to like helping. I still like helping, just not me. Ruth exhaled. That isn't what I said. It's what you keep saying without saying it. Denise stood, wiped her hands, and left the fruit behind. Afterward, Walter said, You are better at making her table look warm. Ruth turned on him. I didn't say you should do it. Then don't say anything. He raised both hands. The argument remained in Ruth after Denise's car disappeared. It followed her upstairs, where she spent an hour stripping the last red cherries from the cabinets. She had wanted Denise to notice the new wiring, the sound roof, the cleaned woodwork. Instead, Ruth had watched her daughter's face close over one refused favor. Monday morning, Eric came with 2 coffees and the old fan motor from his freezer. For Sam, he said. Walter accepted the motor. He'll say it isn't worth rebuilding. Will he rebuild it? Probably. Eric stayed to help remove the charred rear partition. The worst studs had already been taken out. A temporary brace held the ceiling while they prepared for the new header. Ruth left them measuring and drove to the warehouse to collect the bathroom tile. When she returned, Eric's van was gone. Walter sat on the rear steps with his left arm tucked against his body. The tile receipt slipped in Ruth's hand. What happened? Nothing. She set down her purse. Your nothing has posture. He tried to stand without pushing off with his left hand. Pain crossed his face before he could hide it. Walter. Eric got called back to the restaurant. Delivery issue. That is not what I asked. I was moving the header into position. Alone, I had the jack. The jack is not a person. It shifted, and you caught it. I kept it from falling. With your shoulder. He looked away. Ruth crouched in front of him. Can you lift your arm? I can lift it. Show me. He raised it perhaps 3 inches. They spent 2 hours at urgent care. The x-rays showed no break or dislocation, but the doctor called it a severe strain and placed Walter's arm in a sling. No lifting, pulling, overhead work, or heroic interpretations of the instructions. Physical therapy, if the pain did not improve. On the way out, Walter said, "He seemed young. He was 40. That's young for a doctor, not for understanding the word no lifting." Walter did not answer. Their rented room felt smaller with the sling. Ruth helped him remove his shirt, guiding the sleeve over his swollen shoulder. He kept apologizing whenever he winced, as if pain were poor manners. She put ice in a dish towel and settled it against him. "I had it balanced," he said. "I don't care. If the jack hadn't slipped, I don't care about the jack." He sat on the edge of the bed, looking old in a way he had not at the auction, or on the courthouse steps, or in the dark house while rain struck the roof. Not weak, injured. There was a difference, and Ruth hated that she had to remind herself. "We had an agreement," she said. "I wasn't on the roof. You think that makes this better?" "No, Eric could have come back. It needed to be set before the carpenter arrived. Then we could have paid the carpenter for another hour." Walter's jaw tightened. "Every hour costs. So does this." "I know. Do you? Because I'm beginning to think that blacklist in your notebook wasn't about saving money." He looked at her then. Ruth held the ice against his shoulder. "Who are you trying to prove something to?" For a moment, she thought he would retreat into silence. "Them," he said. The word was so quiet, she almost missed it. Denise and Eric? Maybe. His eyes moved toward the tiny kitchenette, the one plate, the one fork. "When they put our names in separate columns, it felt like they had already decided what was left of me. A room behind a restaurant, a man near the tools." Ruth's anger loosened, but it did not disappear. "So, you tried to lift a house. I tried to set one piece of wood. You don't get to reduce it now." He closed his eyes. She adjusted the towel beneath the ice. "You are not the labor we bought for $900. His mouth moved, almost a smile. "I mean it," she said. "If this house requires your body more than it requires you, we sell it." That made him open his eyes. Ruth held his gaze. "I will not save our marriage by letting the building take you apart." The radiator struck once in the wall, then went quiet. Walter lowered his good hand over hers. "All right." She did not ask what he was agreeing to. Not yet. The agreement lasted until 7 the next morning, when Ruth found Walter trying to pull on his work boots with one hand. "What are you doing?" "Getting dressed." "For what?" "My appointment with the chair." The chair was a metal folding chair Ruth had placed in the downstairs front room. From it, Walter could answer questions, study plans, and irritate paid professionals without lifting anything heavier than coffee. "You hate that chair. I hate this room more." He gestured toward the rented room with his good hand. The motion encompassed the sloping bed, the rattling refrigerator, and a damp bath towel hanging from the only available doorknob. Ruth helped him tie his boots. At the Duplex, Walter discovered that supervision was harder than labor. The carpenter Ruth hired to set the header was a compact woman named Carla Dean, who had framed houses for 32 years, and did not require Walter to prove she knew what a level was. "You can cut 3/16 off that end," he told her. Carla checked her mark. "I can. The jack needs to come left. It will. That post isn't centered. It isn't installed." Walter shifted in the folding chair. Carla looked at Ruth. "Does he have an off switch?" "He has a sleep setting, but it's unreliable. The new header went into place without drama." Carla used 2 assistants, a proper lift, and less than 2 hours. Walter watched the entire process, with his injured arm secured against his chest. When they finished, he inspected the work from the floor. "Good," he said. Carla packed her tools. "I was worried." Her bill took another $900 from the reserve. Ruth paid it without looking at Walter. Eric came that afternoon carrying a container of soup and more guilt than would fit inside it. He stood in the front room, staring toward the repaired partition. "I should have stayed," he said. Walter adjusted his sling. "You had a delivery. I could have come back." "You didn't tell me to move the header alone. I knew you would." This was not quite true. Everyone knew Walter might do too much. That was different from expecting the exact shape of his mistake. Ruth let the unfairness hang for a moment before she removed it. "Your father made the decision," she said. "You don't get to take credit just because guilt is more comfortable than helplessness." Eric looked at her. "I'm trying to apologize." "To whom?" He turned to Walter. "I'm sorry I left." Walter accepted with a nod that seemed too easy. Eric's shoulders remained raised. "What can I do?" Ruth pointed to the upstairs hallway. "The old carpet needs to come out." He stayed 4 hours. The carpet had been fastened with enough staples to restrain an aircraft. Eric worked on his knees, prying each one from the floorboards, while Walter sat nearby, explaining better methods. After 40 minutes, Eric handed him a pair of pliers. "You want to do it?" Walter looked at the sling. "Then let me hate it my way," Eric said. Walter stopped instructing. Denise learned about the injury before dinner. Eric called her from the restaurant, and Denise arrived at the rented room carrying ice packs, a bag of groceries, and vindication she tried not to display. "I'm not saying anything," she announced. "You just did," Ruth said. Denise inspected the sling. She asked Walter about numbness, medication, and follow-up care. When he mentioned physical therapy, she took out her phone. "I know someone at an excellent clinic. The doctor gave me a referral," Walter said. "Those appointments take forever. Let me call. I can call. It'll take me 2 minutes." Walter looked toward Ruth for help. Ruth pretended to read the label on a can of soup. Denise secured him an appointment for the following Tuesday. While Walter showered, Denise unloaded groceries into the tiny refrigerator. She placed every item as if stocking shelves in a photograph, yogurt labels facing out, fruit arranged by color. "You were right," Ruth said. Denise's hand stopped inside the refrigerator. "He shouldn't have lifted it. I didn't come to be right. You came with 3 ice packs, one for the room, one for the house, one in case you lose one. We have an ice tray. This freezer couldn't freeze an argument." Ruth smiled despite herself. Denise shut the refrigerator. "He could have been hurt worse." "I know. Then stop looking at me like I caused it." Ruth leaned against the kitchenette counter. "I'm not. You are. Ever since that dinner, everything I say gets placed in evidence. That's not fair." "No," Denise said. "It isn't." Walter's shower ended. Water continued to run in the pipes with a hollow knocking sound. Denise lowered her voice. If he had stayed behind Eric's restaurant, this wouldn't have happened. There it was. Ruth looked toward the bathroom door. He would have fixed that freezer for free, and Eric would have called it keeping him active. At least he wouldn't be rebuilding a burned house. No, he'd just be disappearing somewhere you didn't have to see. Denise recoiled. "Do you honestly think that little of me?" "I think you love us. I also think you liked us best when our lives were useful to yours." Walter opened the bathroom door wearing pajama pants and a damp undershirt. His left arm remained strapped close to his body. Neither woman spoke. He looked between them. "Did I miss soup?" Denise left 10 minutes later. She took one of the ice packs with her by mistake. The argument changed nothing immediately. Denise still drove Walter to his first therapy appointment because Ruth had to meet the plumber. She waited in the clinic lobby and brought him back with a printed exercise sheet tucked into her purse. "She says I have good range for my age," Walter reported. "Who does?" Ruth asked. "The therapist? Denise?" She said the parking was badly designed. That sounded more likely. The plumber finally cleared the basement cleanout and ran a camera through the main line. Ruth stood beside him as the small screen showed a dim tunnel of pipe, grease, mineral buildup, roots at one joint. He paused at a flattened section near the curb. "That's trouble," he said. "How much trouble?" "Not blocked. Not yet." The line remained usable, but a damaged portion would eventually need replacement. The plumber would not put a date on eventually. Ruth wrote his cautious estimate in blue ink and underlined it twice. $7,000, $9,000. She did not show Walter until that evening. He studied the figure on the bed between them. Could last 5 years. Could fail next week. Anything could. "You're not helping. We don't replace what isn't broken when the house still needs heat." Ruth knew he was right. She hated that the camera had shown them a future expense with no clear place in the present. "We keep the reserve," she said. "We've already spent part of it. We keep what's left." He nodded. Outside their window, the first hard snow began to fall. It found Prosperity Avenue before the upstairs plumbing did. Snow slipped through gaps around the back door and gathered in the unfinished utility room. The roof held, but the old furnace did not. A heating contractor opened it, stared into the rusted heat exchanger, and said he would not turn it on if Ruth paid him double. They installed 2 high-efficiency furnaces, one for each apartment, because trying to separate the old ductwork would cost nearly as much. The bill forced them to delay refinishing the floors. Ruth revised the budget while the radiator in their rented room hammered behind her. Winter reduced everything to endurance. They woke pressed together in the center of the sloping mattress. Walter performed his shoulder exercises beside the kitchenette, while Ruth made coffee 1 cup at a time. Their clothes remained in storage except for 2 weeks' worth, hanging from a portable rack. June Paskett brought a second fork and asked them not to run the microwave and hot plate simultaneously because the breaker disliked ambition. At the duplex, the new furnaces warmed rooms without finished walls. Ruth painted trim in a wool cap. Celia stripped the downstairs pantry doors and took them to her sister's garage to sand. Eric came on Monday mornings, the restaurant's quietest time, and worked without being asked. Sometimes he stayed only an hour. Sometimes Ruth noticed him sitting in the van afterward, looking at nothing. Denise visited less often, but each visit included something practical: weather stripping, hand lotion for Walter's dry skin, a bag of clean rags cut from old towels. She did not mention the dining table or the guest room. Ruth missed her and remained angry with her at the same time. The emotions fit together more easily than she expected. Walter's shoulder improved slowly. At first, he celebrated being able to lift a coffee cup without supporting his wrist. Then he raised his arm to chest height. By January, the therapist allowed light work below the shoulder. Ruth wrote light in black ink at the top of a clean notebook page and made him list tasks beneath it. Install switch plates, clean hardware, measure baseboards, repair drawers at bench. No ladders, she said. No ladders. No lifting. No heavy lifting. She stared. No lifting without asking. Better. Learning to ask cost him more than the injury. Ruth saw it when he needed Eric to move a toolbox. Walter stood near it too long, calculating whether pain might be preferable to dependence. Finally, he said, "Give me a hand with this." Eric moved the box without comment. Later, Walter asked Celia to hold a drawer steady while he reset its bottom. He asked Ruth to carry a gallon of paint upstairs. Each request seemed to remove something from him, until, gradually, it began giving something back. People helped, and the work continued. The house did not measure his worth by what he carried alone. One February afternoon, Ruth found him seated at the folding table, fitting cleaned brass hinges onto the downstairs pantry doors. Sunlight came through the front windows and lay across the floorboards in long rectangles. The furnaces hummed. Somewhere upstairs, Eric cursed at a staple. Walter lifted his injured arm and reached for a screwdriver. The movement was careful, almost ordinary. "Does it hurt?" Ruth asked. "Yes." "Should you stop?" "No." She waited. He considered, then set the screwdriver down. In 10 minutes. Ruth poured coffee from Celia's thermos and sat beside him. The duplex was still months from finished. The floors were scarred, the sewer line waited beneath the street, and their remaining reserve had grown thin enough to see daylight through. Yet the room was warm. Walter was asking his body a question instead of issuing an order. Ruth placed his coffee where his good hand could reach it. 10 minutes later, they began again. 10 minutes became the unit by which Walter rebuilt himself. He worked 10, rested 10, and complained during both. The therapist approved increasingly ambitious motions, while Ruth approved almost none of them. They negotiated over screwdrivers, paint rollers, and the weight of half-empty boxes until their marriage began to sound like a small labor dispute. "You may carry 5 pounds, Ruth said. "This is 4. With the drawer attached, the drawer supports itself. It is in your hand, temporarily." She took it from him. By the time the snow along Prosperity Avenue collapsed into gray ridges, Walter could lift his left arm above his head. He did it the first morning he managed, standing in the downstairs front room beneath the temporary bulb. "Look," he said. Ruth looked. His hand trembled slightly at the top. He lowered it before she could tell him to. "Not bad," she said. "Good wiring, wrong system." Outside, green shoots appeared along the fence where Celia had promised the peonies would return. At first, Ruth mistook them for weeds. Celia crouched beside the nearest one and brushed away wet leaves. "Told you. You did. You doubted me." "I doubted the dirt." "The dirt has been here longer than any of us." Celia marked each plant with a scrap of orange tape so the crew would not trample them. There were 11 in all, coming up through broken glass, cigarette filters, and last year's dead stems. Ruth added garden cleanup to the black list, then crossed it out when Celia said the plants did not need management, only room. The upstairs apartment came together in imperfect pieces. The bathroom tile was white on 2 walls and cream on the third because the warehouse had miscounted. Ruth used the black and white pattern on the floor, disguising the shortage as a border. Walter rebuilt the kitchen drawers. Sam installed proper fixtures and complained about the cheap LED bulbs Walter bought. "They make skin look green," Sam said. "We're not operating a theater. You might be." Ruth's tile has drama. The oak floors were cleaned but not refinished. In the bedroom, the old lavender paint required 3 coats to cover. Ruth chose a warm gray and listened to Denise's voice in her mind, object to it. She chose it anyway. After the plumbing, heat, and electrical checks were completed upstairs, the land bank confirmed that Ruth and Walter could occupy that unit while finishing the downstairs work. The letter came by email late on a Wednesday. Ruth read the sentence twice, printed it at the library, and carried the page to Prosperity Avenue in a plastic folder. Walter was fitting a latch to the upstairs linen closet. "We can move in," she said. He lowered the screwdriver. Whenever we can carry 1 plate and 2 forks." His face changed slowly. The pleasure was not the courthouse laughter or the bright amazement of the first working bulb. This was quieter. He touched the printed page with 2 fingers, then looked around the narrow hallway. "We still need bedroom curtains. We own bath towels. We need a handrail at the back stairs. Carla is installing it Friday. The stove isn't connected. It will be tomorrow." He continued finding reasons they could not yet believe it. Ruth put the folder on the windowsill. "Walter," he stopped. "We're going home. June Paskett refunded 3 days of rent and refused payment for the second fork. I bought 4 at an estate sale," she said. "I'm overextended in flatware. The rented room looked larger when their bags were packed. The mattress still sloped, the radiator still banged, and the bathroom door remained unlatched." Ruth stood in the center of the room and felt unexpectedly tender toward it. Misery had been crowded in there, but so had Walter's therapy exercises, midnight budget arguments, shared coffee, and the morning Denise drove him to the clinic in sleet. June hugged them both in the downstairs entry. "You'll miss the radiator," she said. "We'll visit during hunting season," Walter told her. Denise hired the movers again. This time she did not ask whether Ruth was sure. She arrived with Mark, labels, and enough plastic storage bins to survive a flood. Mark carried boxes without giving advice. He was a quiet man who had perfected the expression of someone listening carefully while married to Denise. At Prosperity Avenue, he set down a box marked bedroom and looked through the front hall. "You did all this?" "Not alone," Walter said. Mark studied the clean ceiling medallion, the repaired walls, and the stairs Walter had stripped to bare wood. Still. Denise entered behind him with a lamp. She paused beside the mantel, where the Monday mug remained on its temporary shelf. "That's the chipped cup from the picture." "Mavis's," Ruth said. Denise did not ask who Mavis was. "Where does the lamp go?" Upstairs, she organized Ruth's kitchen before Ruth could stop her. The cabinets were shallow and uneven. Denise worked around their flaws, placing heavy pans where the shelf supports were strongest, and leaving the easiest drawer for Walter's medications and shoulder bands. Ruth watched from the doorway. "You put the coffee too high," she said. Denise moved it down without argument. Near sunset, Eric arrived carrying the green mailbox Ruth and Walter had bought from a hardware store clearance rack. A short wooden post protruded from the back. "Dad said you needed this." Walter followed him from the van with a post hole digger. Ruth stared at the tool. "No, I'm supervising." "Why are you carrying it?" "Transport." Eric took it from him. "He made me promise." "To dig?" "To make him look essential." Walter pointed toward the curb, 24 inches deep. Concrete at the bottom, gravel around the post. Eric put on work gloves. "You want to do it?" Walter looked at his shoulder, then at the hard ground. "No," he said. "I want it straight." They worked beneath the fading light. Eric dug while Walter checked the depth. Mark mixed a small batch of concrete in a bucket. Denise held the mailbox post steady and objected each time someone splashed her shoes. Ruth cleaned the brass numbers at the upstairs sink once more, though they did not need it. When the post was firm, Walter mounted the first 4. Denise attached the 0. Eric took the final 4 from Ruth and screwed it into place. The new mailbox looked too glossy for the scarred duplex. The brass numbers looked too old for the mailbox. Together, they seemed honest. Ruth took a picture and sent it to the family group chat. 404 Prosperity Avenue, she wrote. Denise's reply arrived while she was still standing beside Ruth. Mailbox is standing. No joke followed. Their first dinner in the upstairs apartment came from Eric's restaurant. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans in aluminum containers. Celia joined them after her dispatch shift. Sam brought the repaired freezer motor, claiming it was a housewarming gift for Eric. Carla appeared with a six-pack and inspected her handrail before accepting a plate. There were not enough chairs. Walter and Mark sat on overturned buckets. Denise ate from the counter. Celia leaned against the windowsill while explaining to Sam why transit mechanics were more stubborn than electricians. Eric's phone rang 3 times. He rejected the first 2 calls and stepped into the hallway for the third. Ruth heard only pieces. "I know what the invoice says." "No, Monday." "I said Monday." When he returned, he smiled too quickly and offered everyone more potatoes. Dana arrived after dinner had ended. Ruth had not expected Eric's wife. Dana worked as a dental office manager and usually avoided the restaurant on Eric's days off, which had become nearly every day that Mercer's table was closed. She stood at the top of the stairs wearing her office clothes and holding Eric's jacket. "You left this in the van," she said. Eric looked down at his shirt sleeves. "Thanks. I called. My phone was busy. I know." The room's warmth shifted. Ruth began stacking plates, though none needed stacking. Dana congratulated Ruth and Walter on the apartment. She admired the tile, the cabinets, and the view of the mill's dark windows. Her compliments were sincere and carefully delivered. She did not sit. "Can we go?" she asked Eric. "I'm helping clean up." Dana looked at the empty food containers. "Of course." Eric's face tightened. He took the jacket. Ruth touched Dana's arm as she passed. "Come back when the downstairs is finished." "I'd like that," Dana said. Eric and Dana descended without speaking. Celia watched them leave through the front window. Restaurant trouble? Ruth glanced at Walter. He had noticed the calls too. "Probably just a bill," he said. Sam closed the toolbox containing the rebuilt fan motor. Bills travel in packs. The upstairs apartment became quiet after everyone left. Ruth washed the few dishes they had unpacked. Walter took flattened boxes downstairs, one at a time, and returned each trip more tired. They made their bed in the front bedroom. It sat level. Ruth rolled to her side experimentally. "I'm staying put," she said. Walter lay beside her. "Try harder." The room had no curtains yet, and light from a passing bus moved across the ceiling. Pipes knocked once inside the wall, a softer sound than June's radiator. Below them, the vacant apartment settled around its exposed floors and unfinished kitchen. Ruth listened until Walter's breathing deepened. She had imagined their first night would feel triumphant. Instead, it felt delicate, as if the house might overhear their confidence in object. There was still a damaged sewer line beneath the street, still thousands of dollars in work downstairs, still an inspection deadline written in red on the first page of her notebook. But when she woke before dawn, Walter was beside her. His left hand rested between them, palm open on the sheet. That was enough for one night. The peonies bloomed in May. 11 heavy heads opened along the fence, pink and white against the dark soil. Celia cut 3 from Mavis's mug and placed it on the downstairs mantel. "It leaks," Ruth said, noticing the water ring. It always did. They set a saucer beneath it. With the upstairs occupied, work downstairs no longer felt abstract. Every decision carried Celia's possible return inside it. Ruth asked her to choose between 2 cabinet colors. Celia chose neither and produced a faded photograph of Mavis's kitchen, where the cupboards had been painted a deep yellow. "That looks like mustard," Walter said. It was called Golden Harvest. It was mustard with confidence. They compromised on a soft ochre. Celia signed a written agreement giving her first option to lease the unit at the figure Ruth had proposed, contingent on completion and inspection. She read every line before signing. "So did I," Walter said. Celia handed the pen back to Ruth. "That worries me." One afternoon, Denise stopped by on her way home from a staging job. She parked farther down the block because 2 survey trucks occupied the curb. Men in orange vests were measuring the vacant corner parcels. Denise came upstairs carrying a folder. "Did you know Bellstone Development bought the old pharmacy and 3 lots near the mill?" "No," Ruth said. "They're planning live work units, shops underneath, apartments above." Walter looked up from a drawer he was repairing. "That block has flooded twice. They're adding drainage. You working for them?" "No, I heard about it through an agent. Denise opened the folder. Inside were printed maps, sale records, and an artist's rendering of brick buildings with trees placed at perfectly responsible intervals. Ruth studied her daughter's face. Months earlier, Denise had looked around 404 Prosperity and seen a danger that embarrassed her. Now she walked to the window and surveyed the block, as if measuring it for a frame. This could change the values here, Denise said. A lot. Walter set down his screwdriver. House still has the same number. I know. Denise touched the brass 4, visible on the mailbox below. For the first time, Ruth heard respect in the way her daughter said the address. She also heard calculation. How much? Walter asked. Denise closed the folder halfway. It's too early to put a number on it. You put numbers on everything. I put responsible numbers on things. Ruth sat at the kitchen table. The artist's rendering lay in front of her, all clean sidewalks and decorative lamps. The abandoned pharmacy had been transformed into a coffee shop, populated by attractive people who apparently never needed parking. Denise tapped the map. Bellstone has acquired these 3 parcels. They approached the owner here and here. Your property is directly between the mill project and the transit route. The transit route was here first, Ruth said. I understand that. Celia would be pleased. Denise's mouth tightened at Celia's name, though she recovered quickly. I'm not saying you have to do anything. I'm saying you need to know what you own. We own the place we live, Walter said. You own an asset. We sleep in the asset. That doesn't make it stop being valuable. Ruth looked around the kitchen. One cabinet door still lacked a handle. The floorboards showed pale rectangles where old linoleum had protected them. Denise had complimented those boards after months of referring to the building as a hazard. What would you suggest? Ruth asked. Denise opened the folder again. Let me quietly contact Bellstone. No commitment. If they're assembling the block, they may pay above current value. To tear it down, Walter said. Possibly? Then no. Dad, listen before you decide. I listened. Denise turned to Ruth. This is exactly what I was afraid of. He decides something in one sentence, and you both pretend it was a discussion. Walter pushed back his chair. Ruth placed her hand over the map. I asked what you suggested. He answered for himself. I'm still sitting here. Denise inhaled slowly. You have poured almost all your savings into this building. You're living over a second construction site. If Bellstone offered enough to replace what you spent and give you a reasonable return, why wouldn't you at least consider it? Replace it with what? Ruth asked. A safer house, a condo, travel, something that doesn't need you every hour. Ruth thought of the one-room rental, Denise's guest bed, the 2 columns on the legal pad. And where would that safer house be? That depends on the offer. Exactly. Denise gathered the sale records into a neat stack. There's another possibility. I've been looking for a larger warehouse for the staging business. If you sold and had money left after buying somewhere smaller, I could pay you a better return than the bank. There was the personal number hiding beneath the responsible ones. Walter sat again, very slowly. How much would you want? Ruth asked. I haven't worked it out. You came here with maps, 25, maybe 30, as a loan. Ruth waited for Denise to hear herself. Denise did. Color rose into her cheeks. Forget it. I should not have mentioned my business. You could have mentioned it first, Ruth said. Then you'd assume that was the only reason I cared, wasn't it? No. Denise's voice sharpened. I can care about you and see an opportunity. Those things can exist together. Ruth believed her. That made the conversation harder, not easier. Denise was not plotting to steal the duplex. She saw a property becoming desirable, a business ready to grow, and parents who had always helped when practical help was needed. In her mind, the pieces fit because Mercer family pieces had always been expected to fit. We're not selling, Ruth said, and we're not lending against the house. Fine. It may not feel fine. It feels perfectly clear. Denise slid the folder into her bag and left the artist's rendering behind. Walter watched from the window as she walked to her car. You didn't have to answer that fast. Ruth looked at him. You did. I was answering the demolition part. Would you lend her $30,000 if we had it? He rubbed the edge of the table. She'd pay it back. That's not what I asked. No, he said. It isn't. The rendering remained on the counter for several days. Ruth considered throwing it away, then used the back to make a list of plumbing fixtures. On Monday, Mercer's table did not open. Eric normally arrived at Prosperity Avenue by 8 on Mondays and complained that the restaurant's one weekly closure had turned into his construction shift. At 9, Walter texted him about the downstairs baseboards. At 10, Ruth called and reached voicemail. They drove past the restaurant at noon. The shades were drawn. A paper sign on the front door said, "Closed today. Equipment maintenance," though Sam's rebuilt fan motor had been installed weeks earlier. Dana's car was not in the lot. Walter tried the side entrance. Locked. He would tell us if something happened, he said. Ruth did not answer. Eric appeared at the Duplex that evening. He looked as though he had slept in his clothes, and his restaurant polo carried a streak of flour across the chest. "Phone died," he said before they asked. Walter leaned against the downstairs doorway. "What broke?" "Nothing." Sign said, "Equipment. Customers don't need our financial statements." Ruth set down her paintbrush. Eric stared at the ochre cabinets, the new counters, and the repaired wall as though he resented the room for progressing without him. "I'm behind with 2 suppliers," he said, "and the lease. It's a timing problem." "How far behind?" Ruth asked. "A little. Little has a number. 1800. He looked at her. Walter pulled a chair from the wall. "Sit down." Eric remained standing. Summer was slower than projected. Food costs went up. Dana says I should close, but she's looking at 1 bad quarter. "How many bad quarters?" Ruth asked. 2, maybe 3, depending how you define bad. Not making payroll is bad. I made payroll. With what? Eric's jaw tightened. "Why does this feel like an audit?" "Because you asked us to understand." "I didn't ask anything yet." But the request was already in the room. Walter spoke gently. "You need 18,000 to get current. Then holiday bookings start." Ruth looked at the unfinished apartment. They had enough to complete the planned work if the sewer line held, and nothing else went wrong. 18,000 did not exist unless they emptied the reserve, delayed Celia's apartment, and began borrowing. "We don't have it," she said. Eric laughed once. "You spent more than that here." "Yes." "On a house everyone told you not to buy." "Yes." "But the restaurant is different, is it?" "It's a working business. It was closed today." Walter said Ruth's name quietly. She regretted the cruelty before Eric's face changed, but truth did not become false because it arrived badly. Eric turned toward his father. "Could you take something from the pension account?" "Not without tax consequences," Ruth said. "I asked Dad. And it's our money." Eric's eyes flashed. "There it is? There what is?" "The house. Ever since you bought this place, everything is ours, our choice, our address. Like the rest of us are strangers asking for favors." Ruth stood. "You are asking for $18,000. I'm asking my parents to help save something I built. Your father rebuilt the kitchen. I did your books for free the first year. We have helped. So now the account's closed?" Walter stepped between them, though no one was close enough to require it. "Bring us the numbers." Eric looked at him. "Sales, debt, lease, everything," Walter continued. "Your mother will look, and if she says no, then we'll know what the money would buy." Eric left without agreeing. He returned the next morning with a cardboard file box. Ruth spent 6 hours at the upstairs table, going through statements, invoices, and monthly sales reports. Eric had not lied. He had done something more ordinary. Delayed bad news until each delay created another bill. The restaurant was not $18,000 from safety. It was $18,000 from 6 more weeks. Ruth showed him on paper. Even with holiday bookings, the lease increase and supplier debt left no margin. He could negotiate, reduce hours, or close while he still had equipment to sell. A loan from his parents would not repair the numbers. Eric stared at the page. "You don't know restaurants. I know subtraction. People come back in winter, not enough of them. You decided before you opened the box." "I hoped the box would change my mind." He shoved the chair back and walked out. Walter remained at the table. "You agree with me," Ruth said. "I do." "You look like you don't. I look like his father." Mercer's table stayed closed the following Monday, then Tuesday. By Friday, Eric had posted a message thanking customers for 11 years of support. He called it a pause for restructuring. The Ford lease sign appeared in the window 2 weeks later. Dana came to Prosperity Avenue alone. She stood beneath the green mailbox, holding her car keys with both hands. Ruth invited her upstairs, but Dana said she could not stay. "Eric moved out," she said. Ruth felt the sentence before she understood it. Where is he? The office at the restaurant, I think. Maybe a motel. What happened? Dana looked tired rather than angry. Nothing happened once. That's the problem. Every month was going to be better next month. Every conversation was after the next dinner service. He signed another personal loan without telling me. Ruth pressed her lips together. I'm not asking you to fix it, Dana said. Please don't hear that. I hear you. I love him. I can't keep being the last person to learn what our life costs. Ruth thought of Walter's yellow pad, the black list, the header balanced on a jack. Love did not make secrecy less dangerous. Sometimes it only gave secrecy a place to sleep. Thank you for telling us, she said. They found Eric that evening in the darkened restaurant. The dining chairs were upside down on the tables. The room smelled faintly of fryer oil and lemon cleaner. Eric sat in a booth with a laptop open before him and no lights except the exit sign. Walter slid into the opposite seat. You can't stay here, he said. I'm not. You're wearing yesterday's shirt. I have another one in the office. Ruth sat beside Walter. Come to the Duplex. Eric gave a tired smile. The successful branch of the Mercer Empire? The spare room upstairs, Walter said. Eric looked toward the kitchen doors. Dana send you? She told us you moved out, Ruth said. She asked me to. There's a difference. Not tonight. He closed the laptop. I'm not moving into your house so you can watch me fail. Up close. Ruth folded her hands on the table. The old version of herself wanted to say he would owe nothing, that he could stay as long as he needed, that she would cook and wash his clothes until shame loosened its grip. That kind of help had always felt like love, because no one had to name its cost. You can rent the spare room, she said, a small amount. You'll work downstairs a set number of hours until you find other employment. You buy your own groceries and tell us how long you expect to stay. Eric stared at her. You're giving me terms? Yes. I'm your son. That is why I'm offering you a room. The terms are so we can remain people who love each other. He looked at Walter. Walter's face hurt, but he nodded. We won't store you, Eric, and we won't pretend you're not responsible for being there. The exit sign colored one side of Eric's face red. What if I say no? Then we'll help you find somewhere else, Ruth said. He rubbed both hands over his face. For a long moment, the only sound came from the refrigerator compressor behind the bar. How many hours? He asked. Ruth had not planned that far. She ate a week. Rent? She named a figure low enough to be possible and high enough to be real. Eric looked around the dining room he had named after their family. Can I keep the freezer motor? Walter leaned back. It was a housewarming gift. For which house? That depends, Ruth said, on whether you pack your shirts. Eric arrived at 404 Prosperity the next afternoon with 2 duffel bags, a cardboard box of kitchen knives, and the rebuilt motor wrapped in a towel. He stopped at the curb before coming inside. Ruth watched from the upstairs window as he read the brass numbers on the mailbox. No prosperity joke, no grin. He rested one hand on the green metal door, then raised the flag. The mailbox was empty, except for an envelope marked rent. Ruth found it when she went downstairs to meet him. Inside were folded bills totaling the amount they had agreed upon. You haven't spent one night here, she said. Eric lifted his duffel from the sidewalk. I know how rent works. You raise the flag. I thought that meant there was something in it. It means there's outgoing mail. Then you should have bought a more intuitive mailbox. He carried his bags upstairs. The spare room was the smaller of the 2 bedrooms, barely wide enough for a full bed and a dresser. Ruth had cleared her sewing basket from the closet, but left a stack of folded towels on the mattress. Eric looked at them, then at her. Those are not a service, she said. They were already clean. I didn't say anything. You were about to. I was going to say thank you. Oh, he smiled for the first time in several days. You're out of practice. They wrote the arrangement on 1 sheet of lined paper. Monthly rent, 8 work hours a week, groceries separate, 30 days notice before leaving. Walter insisted on adding that Eric could use the laundry machines when they were connected downstairs. Eric added that Walter could not charge him for electricity used by the freezer motor. It isn't connected to anything, Walter said. Then your risk is low. Ruth signed first. Walter signed beneath her. Eric read the page longer than necessary before adding his name. The first week was difficult in ways no agreement could predict. Eric left kitchen knives soaking in the sink, which Walter considered a moral failure. Walter woke at 5:30 and made coffee loudly. Ruth discovered herself listening for Eric's steps in the hallway, measuring his sleep as if it belonged to her. Twice she almost gathered his clothes from the bathroom floor. Twice she stepped over them. On Thursday, Eric ate the last of Walter's oatmeal. "You marked your milk," Walter said. "Why didn't you mark the oatmeal?" "Because I didn't know cereal had property rights. It has a purchaser." Ruth set a grocery receipt beside Eric's coffee cup. He read it, went downstairs, and returned that evening with 2 containers of oatmeal. "One for the purchaser," he said. "One for the tenant." Walter accepted this without smiling. The next morning, Ruth found both containers open because Walter had compared the oats. Eric completed his 8 hours downstairs in 3 long shifts. He sanded cabinet doors, installed baseboards, and patched nail holes with the tense concentration of a man who expected every crooked line to testify against him. Walter corrected him less than usual. Ruth suspected the restraint hurt them both. The downstairs kitchen became Eric's territory by accident. Carla had framed the new wall, but the cabinet layout still existed only in Ruth's notebook. Eric studied it for 10 minutes and moved the sink cabinet 6 inches. "You can't do that," Ruth said. "Why?" "Because it goes there. Then whoever cooks here will open the oven into their hip." Celia stood in the doorway. "He's right." Ruth looked from one to the other. "You planned this?" "I arrived 30 seconds ago," Celia said. Eric set a stock pot on the temporary counter to demonstrate. With the original layout, the refrigerator, oven, and sink forced the cook to cross the narrow room for every task. He rearranged the lowers into a compact working line and found room for a pull-out trash bin beside the sink. "You learned something from that restaurant," Walter said. Eric kept measuring. "Mostly I learned where not to put the trash." It was the first time Walter had mentioned Mercer's table without either man stiffening. They used Eric's layout. The work hours did not erase his other troubles. Calls from creditors continued. Restaurant equipment had to be cleaned, priced, and sold. The landlord disputed one repair charge. Dana communicated by text and refused to discuss moving back together. One evening, she came to collect a box of tax records. Ruth was trimming peony stems near the fence when Dana pulled up. Eric came outside carrying the box. They stood beneath the mailbox, speaking too quietly for Ruth to hear. Dana touched the brass 0 with one finger while listening. Eric's shoulders moved once, not quite a shrug. When she left, he remained at the curb until her car disappeared. Ruth carried the stems to the compost pile. "I'm sorry," she said. Eric pushed both hands into his pockets. "She says she doesn't trust next month anymore." Ruth waited. "I keep telling her the restaurant is over, so next month will be different." "Will it?" He glanced at her. "You could pretend to be on my side. I am on your side. Doesn't feel like it. Your side is not always the place where you're standing." He kicked at a tuft of grass. "That sounds like something you practiced." "It does, doesn't it?" A reluctant laugh escaped him. They went inside without solving anything. Celia began bringing dinner on Eric's work nights, claiming the new kitchen needed menu testing before she signed a lease. She cooked rice with tomatoes and peppers on the upstairs stove while Eric criticized the size of her knife. "You could sharpen it," she said. "You could replace it. It belonged to my mother. Then she also needed a sharper knife." He sharpened it. Sam came for dinner once and stayed to help Walter repair a warped drawer. Carla stopped by to check a patch in the rear wall and left with a container of Celia's rice. The apartment filled easily around people Ruth had known less than a year. Denise noticed. She arrived one Saturday carrying another folder and found Eric painting the downstairs pantry while Celia chose hardware. Sam was on the porch with Walter, arguing about whether an old switch box could be repurposed in the workshop. Denise stood inside the front door, taking in the scene. "You live here now?" she asked Eric. "For now." "No one told me." Eric rolled paint from his sleeve. It wasn't a press release. She looked at Ruth. "How long has he been here?" 3 weeks. "And you didn't think to mention it?" "You and Eric speak. Not about where he sleeps, apparently." Ruth took the folder from Denise's hand before it became a weapon. "What's this?" "A market analysis." Walter entered from the porch. "We said no. It's information." Bellstone paid $78 for the corner house, and it had major foundation problems. "Did anyone live there?" Ruth asked. "No." Then they weren't buying somebody's home. Denise crossed her arms. "Your sentiment does not change the value. Your numbers don't change the address." Eric appeared in the kitchen doorway with a paintbrush. "What's going on?" Denise turned toward him. Apparently, Mom and Dad are sitting on a property that could solve several problems, but they won't even consider an offer. Walter's expression hardened. Whose problems? I didn't mean mine. You brought the loan up, Ruth said, and Eric needs a fresh start. Eric's face changed. Leave me out of it. I'm trying to help you. By selling the place I'm staying, by creating options. Ruth heard the word from the first legal pad, as clearly as if Denise had placed it on the floor between them. No, she said. Denise looked at her. No what? No offer. No meeting with Bellstone. No loan against the building. No discussion about dividing money we do not intend to create. You're acting like I'm waiting for you to die. No one answered. The hurt on Denise's face became anger, because anger could stand upright in company. She pointed toward Eric. He closes a restaurant, separates from his wife, and gets a room. Celia loses an apartment years ago and gets it rebuilt for her. Sam gets Dad's labor. Everybody who walks through that door gets something except me. Ruth set the folder on the mantel beside Mavis's mug. What do you want from this house? She asked. I just told you. No. You told me what you want from selling it. Denise's eyes glistened. Maybe I want to know I still belong here. The room went quiet. Celia lowered the cabinet handle she had been holding. Eric stepped back from the doorway. Walter's gaze remained on Denise. Ruth had not expected that answer. She had prepared herself for calculation and found loneliness underneath it, which did not excuse the pressure, but made it harder to dismiss. You belong here when you come to see us, Ruth said, not when you come to turn the house into money. That's convenient. It's true. Denise picked up her purse. Keep the analysis. Throw it away. Line a cabinet with it. She left before Ruth could decide whether to follow. Walter moved toward the door, but Ruth stopped him with a hand. Let her go. You sure? No. They watched Denise drive away. Eric put the paintbrush in a tray. She wasn't wrong about one thing. Ruth turned. You let people work their way in, he said. Denise doesn't know how. That is not my fault. No, but it might be your problem. He returned to the pantry. Ruth stood in the middle of the room, angry that Wisdom had arrived wearing paint-splattered jeans and owing her rent. The following week, Denise did not call. She responded to Ruth's messages with heart symbols and short answers that closed the conversation without technically refusing it. Ruth did not mention Bellstone again. The company placed a large sign on the old pharmacy, then fenced the vacant lots. Property flyers began appearing in the mailbox. Walter used them beneath paint cans. Downstairs, the ochre cabinets received their handles. The dark green tile went up behind the stove. Celia paid a small deposit, which Ruth kept in a separate envelope rather than spending on construction. They chose a move-in date that left 6 weeks before the compliance deadline, enough time to solve ordinary problems. Ruth no longer believed in ordinary problems. Eric's first full month at 404 ended with his rent envelope placed correctly inside the mailbox, flag down. He had found temporary work managing inventory for a restaurant supply company. It paid less than Mercer's Table had during its best years and more than it had during its last one. He came home tired from counting boxes and still completed his 8 hours downstairs. One Sunday, Ruth found him and Walter installing the pantry doors. They worked in companionable silence. Walter held a hinge while Eric drove the screws. Level? Eric asked. Walter stepped back. Close. Close means no. Door will settle. Doors don't settle. Buildings settle. Walter looked at him with surprise. Who told you that? You, for 11 years. They adjusted the hinge. Later, while Ruth washed brushes at the utility sink, Eric joined her. He rinsed green paint from his hands and watched it spiral down the drain. I shouldn't have made that joke, he said. What joke? Poverty Avenue? The tetanus thing. Ruth turned off the water. Eric wiped his hands on a rag. I thought if it was a stupid decision, then you'd still need me to explain things. If it worked, you didn't. We needed help, not the kind I was offering. No? He nodded. I'm sorry. The apology was smaller than the injury, and better for being late. Ruth handed him the clean brush. You can put that on the drying rack. Is that forgiveness? That is a wet brush. He smiled and carried it away. The next morning, a package arrived for Eric. The label read, Eric Mercer, 404 Prosperity Avenue. Ruth placed it on the kitchen table. When he came home, He stood looking at the address longer than the contents required. "Restaurant uniforms," he said. "For the new job?" He nodded. Ruth touched the cardboard corner. "Looks like they found you?" Eric picked up the package with both hands. "Yeah," he said. "Looks like it." 3 nights later, the downstairs toilet answered a test flush by pushing brown water up through the basement drain. Celia was the one who saw it first. She had been cleaning the bathroom cabinet when Eric flushed upstairs. A bubbling sound rose beneath her feet, followed by a smell strong enough to make her drop the drawer she was holding. "Don't run anything!" she shouted. Walter reached the basement ahead of Ruth. He stopped on the last safe step and aimed his flashlight across the floor. Water spread in a thin, ugly sheet around the drain. "That isn't supposed to be there," Eric said behind him. Celia turned. "Your expertise continues to impress." They stopped using the plumbing and called the same plumber who had run the camera months earlier. He arrived the next morning, fed the line again, and found the camera blocked near the damaged section. "The flattened part gave way," he said. "Could be soil movement. Could have been waiting for one good flush." Eric raised a hand. "I'd like to withdraw my flush." The plumber did not smile. He marked the yard with orange paint, called for underground utility lines to be located, and prepared an estimate. $8,600. Ruth read the figure standing beside the green mailbox. The deadline written in red in her notebook was 27 days away. They still needed the rear steps completed, 2 exterior outlets corrected, and final clearance on the downstairs apartment. Their construction account held $3,400. Walter read over her shoulder. "We can borrow." "Against what?" "The trailer. We could sell it." He looked toward the duplex. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The trailer sat in a storage lot outside town, a 19-foot white box with green stripes and a stubborn refrigerator. They had bought it used 7 years earlier, after Walter's retirement, and taken it on exactly 4 trips. Each year, some obligation had interrupted the longer journey they promised themselves. Eric needed the restaurant kitchen rebuilt. Denise moved offices and needed help organizing inventory. Ruth had surgery. Walter's sister became ill. There had always been a practical reason to wait. Inside the trailer, a road atlas remained open to a route Walter had drawn from Ohio through South Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana. He wanted to see the Badlands at sunrise. Ruth wanted to visit a cafe in Nebraska, famous for pie, mostly because Walter insisted no pie could justify Nebraska. They called the trailer Junebug because the first trip had occurred in June, and because Ruth refused Walter's suggestion of the retirement plan. "It's paid for," Walter said. "So is the sewer problem. We could take a loan against it and pay after Celia's rent starts." Ruth looked at him. With what margin? He knew the answer. They would begin their life at 404 with a tenant downstairs and a monthly payment attached to the street outside. The plumber needed a deposit before scheduling excavation. With utility marking and permits, the repair would take at least 2 weeks to begin. Ruth asked for 1 day. Inside, the water had receded, leaving a dark ring around the drain. Celia stood on the basement stairs with a bottle of disinfectant. "I can pay 6 months ahead," she said. "No," Ruth replied. "You didn't hear the amount. I know what 6 months is. It's rent I'll owe. You do not owe it before you can live here." Celia crossed her arms. "You're not giving me anything for free, remember? That includes the privilege of financing our emergency. It's my sewer, too." "Not yet." Celia looked offended by the distinction. Ruth understood. Refusing help could make a person feel as useless as never offering it. 1 month in advance, Ruth said. "Applied to your first month in writing. 3, 2, fine." They shook hands. The advance still left them thousands short. Eric offered the money from the sale of his restaurant's ovens. Ruth refused that too. "You don't know what you'll owe after the landlord finishes arguing," she said. "I live here. You pay rent. I can do more than rent. Yes, you can protect the money you have left." He turned to Walter. "Are you going to let her say no to everybody?" Walter rubbed his shoulder. "She's getting tired. Eventually she'll weaken." Ruth gave him a look. "But not today," he added. That evening, Walter took the storage key from the hook beside the upstairs door. "We should ask Denise," he said. Ruth closed the notebook. "For a loan," he continued. "A real one. Interest, monthly payments. You heard her last time. She wanted 30,000. We need 5. She wanted her name on the house before we needed anything. She wanted security. She wanted an opening." Walter sat across from her. Junebug was our plan. This is our plan. It was supposed to be both. His voice remained calm, but Ruth heard the loss inside it. The trailer had not only been a vehicle, it had been proof that their lives would eventually contain something unnecessary. Ruth reached across the table. Call her. Denise came the next morning without a folder. She stood in the downstairs front room while Ruth explained the collapsed line, the estimate, and the deadline. Denise listened without interrupting. When Walter mentioned a $5,000 loan, she asked to see their construction budget. Ruth gave it to her. Denise studied each page, from the first estimates to the roofer's change order and Carla's header bill. She paused at the sewer note Ruth had underlined months earlier. You knew this might happen. Yes. Anne kept going. Yes. Denise closed the notebook. I can write the check today. Relief moved through Ruth before caution caught it. What terms? She asked. Denise looked tired. You don't trust me at all, do you? I trust you to have terms. After a moment, Denise nodded. My name goes on the property. Not half. A small recorded interest equal to the loan. Walter leaned forward. We could sign a promissory note. A note puts me behind everyone if something happens. I'm taking money out of my business. We'd pay interest, he said, and I'd still have no control. There was the word Ruth had expected. Denise continued, more quickly. Or I could take an option on the downstairs apartment after Celia's initial lease. I need storage and a client meeting space. The neighborhood is improving. It would be good for my business and give you a guaranteed tenant later. Celia was outside moving peony stakes away from the proposed trench. Through the window, Ruth could see her red coat bent over the plants. You want us to promise you her apartment, Ruth said. After her lease, I said after. She hasn't moved in yet. That's why we should discuss it now. Ruth looked at Walter. His face had closed. Denise touched the notebook. You asked for a business loan. I'm offering business terms. No, Ruth said. Mom, no name on the deed, no claim on Celia's home. It isn't her home. The room went still. Denise heard the sentence, but pride kept her from taking it back. Ruth picked up the notebook. It wasn't ours either when you mocked the address. That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with it. You saw a burned building when it needed work. Now you see leverage because other people did the work. I am trying to keep you from losing the whole property over a sewer line. You're trying to make sure that if we survive it, part of the survival belongs to you. Denise's eyes filled. Fine. Sell the trailer. Give up the one thing Dad talked about for years because accepting help from me is apparently more dangerous. Walter flinched. Ruth wanted to answer sharply, but Denise had found the true cost. The fact that she used it cruelly did not make it false. Denise picked up her purse. At the door, she turned to Walter. I would have given you the money, she said. I know, he replied, with paperwork. Like Mom insists everyone else have. I know. Denise waited for him to defend her. When he did not, she left. Walter remained by the window until her car disappeared. You could have said something, Ruth said. I was deciding who was right, and you both were. Then neither of you was. He took the storage key from his pocket. They drove to see Junebug that afternoon. Dust dulled the windows. One tire had lost pressure, and a bird had built a nest on top of the propane cover. Walter opened the door and stood aside for Ruth. The trailer smelled of vinyl, closed cupboards, and the lemon air freshener Denise had once bought them. Their mugs remained nested in the sink. Ruth opened the cabinet above the bed and found the road atlas beneath a folded blanket. Walter sat at the small dinette. We never made it past Indiana. We made it to Kentucky. That was for your cousin's funeral. Still crossed a state line. He laughed quietly. Ruth opened the atlas to the marked route. Walter had circled the Badlands overlook in blue ink. Beside a town in Nebraska, she had written PIE in red. We can travel without a trailer, she said. That isn't the same. No. He looked around the narrow space. I kept thinking there would be a year when nobody needed anything. Ruth sat opposite him. Maybe we needed to stop being available. We bought a duplex instead. We're improving slowly. He ran his good hand along the table's edge. I wanted to wake up somewhere and not know what needed fixing. Ruth closed the atlas. I wanted to wake up beside you. Walter looked down. That sounds sentimental, she said. It does. Don't repeat it. They listed the trailer that evening. A retired respiratory therapist and her husband came 2 days later. They inspected the roof, tested the appliances, crawled beneath the frame, and offered $8,300. It was less than Walter hoped and enough to close the gap. The woman found the atlas on the dinette. "Yours?" she asked. Walter took it from her. "Yes." He folded it beneath his arm. At the title office, Ruth signed the transfer. Walter handed over the keys, including the small brass one for the exterior storage compartment. The new owners drove Junebug away slowly, green stripes passing behind the chain-link fence until the trailer turned onto the highway and disappeared. Walter stood beside the empty parking space. Ruth did not tell him they had made the right decision. Right decisions were allowed to hurt without being defended. The sewer crew took their deposit the next morning and scheduled excavation for the following Tuesday. The trench would run along the fence. Celia stared at the orange marks cutting through the peony bed. "They'll destroy the roots." "Can we move them?" Ruth asked. "If we're careful." They began before sunset. Celia loosened the soil with a garden fork while Eric dug around each crown. Walter carried the smaller divisions in a plastic tub within his lifting limit. Sam brought buckets. Carla arrived after work with a shovel and refused dinner until the plants were safe. 11 peonies became 23 divided roots lined along the rear wall, tagged pink or white where Celia could remember. No one volunteered to be there. Ruth had called and offered an hourly rate for help. Sam accepted $5 and a sandwich. Carla charged her usual rate for the first hour and donated the second without discussion. Eric counted it toward his 8. Celia deducted nothing from her promised rent. When darkness fell, the flower bed stood empty. Ruth looked at the bare strip of soil where the plants had bloomed. "They'll come back," Celia said. "You're sure?" "No." Ruth turned to her. Celia wiped dirt across her coat. "But they came back once." On Tuesday, the excavator broke through the ground beside the green mailbox. The first section of clay pipe crumbled when the operator lifted it. 21 days remained. The second section held long enough to be carried into the street. The third broke under the excavator's bucket. Orange clay fell into the trench like pieces of a flower pot. Walter stood behind the safety barrier with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching each foot of damaged pipe emerge. "Could have lasted 5 years, Ruth said. He glanced at her. "I was wrong. You don't have to sound pleased that I noticed. I'm pleased we didn't borrow against it." The plumber replaced the old line with white PVC from the foundation to the city connection. Rain began before noon, turning the excavated soil into dark, heavy mud. The crew laid plywood across the walkway so Ruth and Walter could enter the house without sinking to their ankles. For 2 days, the green mailbox stood inside the fence with its post wrapped in a tarp. Its absence from the curb bothered Ruth more than it should have. Packages went to the upstairs porch. Bills arrived damp beneath the door. Prosperity Avenue remained where it had always been, but without the brass numbers beside the street, the house looked temporarily unclaimed. The repair passed its pressure test and camera inspection. The final bill came to $8,900 after the crew found an additional broken joint near the foundation. Junebug covered most of it. Celia's 2 months of advance rent and the remaining reserve covered the rest. Ruth wrote the last figure in red. The construction account held $412. "That's enough for dinner," Walter said. "For how many?" "2, if we don't invite Sam." Sam, who was replacing the exterior outlet at the time, shouted from downstairs. "I heard that." With 19 days remaining, the yard resembled a construction site that had been struck by another construction site. The trench had been filled, but mounds of wet soil sagged along the fence. The rear steps lacked their second handrail. 2 cabinet doors needed adjustment. The basement required a fire-rated enclosure around the new furnaces. One downstairs window refused to remain open without a stick. Ruth wrote each task on a sheet of paper and taped it to the kitchen wall. Eric read the list before leaving for his inventory job. "That all?" "No, I was being optimistic." "Don't start now." He circled the cabinet doors and rear handrail. "I can do these Saturday." "You have work. Saturday is one of my 8 hours. You already completed 8. Then apply it to next week. You may have moved by next week." His room had begun to look temporary in a new way. The duffel bags were zipped. His restaurant knives had been sold, except for the one he used daily. He had found a small furnished apartment closer to the supply warehouse and planned to move after Celia settled downstairs. Eric looked toward the hall. "You trying to get rid of me?" No. You're not trying very hard to keep me. That is different. He nodded as if the difference mattered. Walter removed the task list from the wall and rewrote it in sequence. His version accounted for drying time, tool availability, and which work could occur simultaneously. Ruth's list had been a record of anxiety. His became a schedule. Rear handrail today, he said. Window tomorrow. Fire enclosure after Sam finishes the outlet. You're not building the handrail. No. The answer came without argument. Ruth looked at him. What? He asked. Nothing. Then stop admiring me. Carla installed the second handrail at her standard rate and accepted payment from Ruth's household account when the construction account could not cover it. Sam labeled the electrical panel and corrected the outlet. Eric adjusted the cabinet doors after dinner, refusing Walter's suggestion that one was close enough. Celia sanded the downstairs windows and packed her belongings at her sister's house. Every morning, she arrived with another small item for the apartment. A copper-bottomed pan, a framed print, the sharpened knife. She kept them boxed in the front room, as if unpacking before approval might offend fate. Where will Monday go? Ruth asked. Celia glanced at the mug on the mantel. Same place. It leaks. So does the basement wall in a hard rain. We fixed that. Then Monday deserves equal treatment. They did not move it. A preliminary inspection took place with 10 days remaining. The inspector was a narrow man named Mr. Kemper, who wore clean work boots and used the eraser end of his pencil to test railings. He checked outlets, measured stair clearance, ran water in both units, and spent a long time in the basement looking at the furnace enclosure. Ruth followed with her notebook. Walter followed Ruth until Mr. Kemper asked him not to stand directly behind him on the stairs. He likes to see what people are writing, Ruth said. So does she, Walter added. Mr. Kemper gave no indication that either fact interested him. The list he produced contained 7 items. 2 were simple: label the downstairs shutoff and install a cover on the exterior cleanout. 2 were irritating. The rear handrail needed to return to the wall at both ends, and a bathroom fan duct was not secured properly. The basement door required a self-closing hinge. The back step varied in height by 3/4 of an inch. The final item was a missing carbon monoxide alarm in the upstairs hallway. We have one in the bedroom, Ruth said. You need one in the hallway. We sleep in the bedroom. Mr. Kemper handed her the list. Hallway. Outside, Walter read the items and said, could be worse. Do not provoke the building. The back step caused the most trouble. Correcting the height meant removing the top board and rebuilding part of the frame Carla had installed before the finished threshold went in. Carla could return in 4 days. Walter believed he and Eric could do it sooner. Ruth looked at him. I said, I believe it, he said. I didn't say we should. Good. Carla will overbuild it. Excellent. She'll use pressure-treated lumber where cedar would, Walter. I'm done. That night, Denise called. Ruth had not spoken to her since the loan conversation. Her name appeared on the phone while Ruth was pricing self-closing hinges. How did the sewer go? Denise asked. It's fixed. And the inspection? 7 items. Is that bad? It depends how much you enjoy carbon monoxide alarms. Denise was quiet. Do you need anything? The question carried no map, no proposed arrangement, no visible condition. Ruth still inspected it for one. We need a specific hinge, she said. The hardware store on the west side has 2 in stock, but we won't get there before they close. I can pick them up. We'll pay you. They're $12. We'll pay you. Denise exhaled. Fine. She arrived an hour later with the hinge, 2 carbon monoxide alarms, and dinner from a Greek restaurant. She handed Ruth a receipt without being asked. Walter installed the hallway alarm, while Denise stood beneath it holding the step stool. His shoulder no longer prevented overhead work, but he let her steady the stool anyway. Celia came upstairs for food. Denise had not seen her since declaring that the downstairs apartment was not yet her home. They greeted each other politely. During dinner, Denise asked when Celia hoped to move. When the house passes, Celia said. It will. Celia tore a piece of bread. That sounded confident. My mother responds well when confidence comes from other people. Ruth looked at Denise. Denise spread hummus on her plate. She does. After dinner, Denise carried the containers to the sink. She washed them before Ruth could object. No one discussed Bellstone, the staging business, or the money Denise had not lent them. At the door, she touched Ruth's arm. "I'm sorry I said it wasn't Celia's home." Ruth waited. "I still think the loan terms were reasonable," Denise added. "There you are. I'm trying. I know." Denise looked toward the downstairs apartment, where Celia's boxed pans were visible through the open door. "I didn't understand why that sentence was cruel until I heard myself say it." Ruth kissed her cheek. "Come back when the list is done. Will there be food? If the account recovers." The back step was rebuilt with 6 days remaining. Carla overbuilt it. She also corrected the handrail returns and refused to charge for the final half hour because, she said, Walter's supervision had already cost Ruth enough. Sam installed the self-closing hinge. Eric secured the fan duct by lying across the attic joists while Ruth held the ladder, and Walter instructed him not to crush the insulation. The exterior cleanout cover arrived in the wrong size. Ruth drove 40 minutes to exchange it and discovered the correct size had been sold that morning. Sam found one in his shop beneath a bin of old fittings. It was scratched but acceptable. He refused payment. "Put it against Walter's 40 minutes, he said. "That debt is imaginary. Most good debts are." The night before the final inspection, they walked through the property with Mr. Kemper's list. Walter tested the rear handrail with both hands. Eric opened and closed the basement door 6 times. Celia ran the bathroom fan and stood beneath the vent outside to feel the air. Ruth flushed every toilet, filled every sink, and watched every drain empty. The peony roots waited in tubs beside the rear wall. The ground along the fence was still too soft to replant them. Their stems had been cut back, leaving the tag crowns plain and unimpressive. "Maybe we should move Monday," Eric said. The mug remained on the downstairs mantel, resting on its saucer beneath the bare bulb. "No," Celia said. "It's been through enough." At midnight, Ruth found Walter at the upstairs kitchen table, with the road atlas open before him. He had drawn no new route. His finger rested near the blue circle in South Dakota. "Could take a train west," he said. "Trains don't stop at every pie place. We could rent a car." "With what money?" He closed the atlas. "Future money." Ruth sat across from him. "We used to have future money. We used to spend future time." She touched the worn cover. "Do you regret it? Selling Junebug? Buying the house?" Walter looked toward the floor, as though he could see through it into the finished apartment below. "No," he said. "I regret that everything worth keeping seems to ask for proof." Ruth understood. The duplex had asked for money, labor, pride, and the dream of an open road. Their children had asked for boundaries painful enough to feel like rejection. Even love had demanded paperwork before it stopped becoming obligation. She closed her hand over his. "We're 3 days from the deadline," she said. "I know. You think it'll pass? I think Mr. Kemper enjoys lists." "That wasn't my question." Walter smiled. "Yes." Mr. Kemper arrived at 9 the next morning. Denise came at 8:30 and waited on the porch without explaining why. Eric had taken the morning off. Sam parked across the street. Carla claimed she was only there to retrieve a level she had left weeks earlier, though no one believed her. Celia stood in the downstairs kitchen beside her boxed pans. Ruth led Mr. Kemper through the duplex. He checked each of the 7 items. The alarm sounded when tested. The handrail held. The fan vented outside. The step heights matched. In the basement, the self-closing door shut slowly behind him and latched. Then he returned to the kitchen and examined his original list. Ruth watched the pencil move down the page. Mr. Kemper initialed the final line. "This addresses the deficiencies," he said. Walter released a breath. Mr. Kemper signed the compliance form, tore off the yellow copy, and handed it to Ruth. 3 days remained on the deadline. Ruth held the paper with both hands. It was not their marriage license, a death certificate, or a notice ending anything. It was an ordinary government form with crooked carbon printing and a smudge where Mr. Kemper's hand had crossed the ink. Behind her, the house filled with noise. Eric laughed. Sam slapped Walter's good shoulder and then apologized. Carla announced that she had never doubted her steps. Denise covered her mouth. Celia leaned one hand against the ochre cabinet and closed her eyes. Ruth looked past them through the front window. At the curb, the green mailbox stood straight. The brass numbers caught the morning sun. 404. Prosperity found. Walter said it aloud before Mr. Kemper reached his car. Prosperity found. Eric groaned. That is worse than Denise's joke. It's the same joke with a positive conclusion. Still worse. Denise wiped beneath one eye. "I'm willing to let him have it." Ruth folded the yellow compliance copy and slipped it into the plastic folder with the upstairs occupancy letter. For months, papers had told them what they could not do, what they owed, and how many days remained. This one simply said the building met its requirements. Celia touched the folder. "Make me a copy. For your lease? For my sister. She thinks I'm moving into a construction site." "You are," Carla said. "It's just a compliant one." They celebrated with coffee from paper cups, because no one had planned for champagne at 9 in the morning. Sam poured a little bourbon into Walter's cup, from a flask he claimed was for electrical emergencies. Carla carried her missing level to her truck, then returned with donuts. Eric called his supervisor and admitted he would be late. Denise stood beneath the green mailbox after the others went inside. Ruth joined her. "You passed," Denise said. "We did. I'm happy for you." "I know." Denise looked at the brass numbers. "I still think Bellstone would pay well." Ruth waited. "But I'm not bringing a folder today," Denise added. "That helps. Apparently folders are threatening now. Only when you open them." Denise smiled faintly. "Do you want help with the dinner?" "What dinner?" "You have to have one. A real one. Not people eating on drywall." Ruth glanced through the front window. Walter was handing the compliance form around, as though signatures changed if enough people examined them. "We can do Saturday," she said. "I'll bring dessert. You can bring chairs." Celia moved downstairs on Friday. Her belongings arrived in her sister's pickup and 2 borrowed cars. There was less furniture than Ruth expected. A bed, a dresser, a round table, and a faded blue sofa Celia insisted was more comfortable than it looked. "It would have to be," Eric said. Celia pointed toward the door. "Tenant may refuse entry to landlord's relatives. You haven't unpacked the lease. I read it." The Monday mug remained on the mantel. Celia placed Mavis's old radio beside it, plugged it in, and found a station playing soul music through a layer of static. "There," she said. "Now it's a kitchen. The radio is in the living room," Walter told her. Celia turned up the volume. Ruth helped make the bed. The sheets were clean, but mismatched, blue flowers over gray stripes. Celia smoothed the top edge and stood looking around the room. For the first time since Ruth had known her, Celia seemed uncertain. "Too yellow?" Ruth asked. "The cabinets?" "Yes." "They're mustard with confidence." Ruth laughed. Celia sat on the edge of the bed. "I told myself I didn't miss this place. You may have been right. It was wet and burned. I miss knowing where every sound came from." Above them, Walter dropped something. It rolled across the upstairs floor and stopped. Celia tilted her head. "Socket wrench. Probably. I'll charge extra if he does that after 10. Ruth gave her the keys to the downstairs unit, the basement, and the green mailbox. Celia closed her hand around them. "No favors," she said. "No favors. Repairs get answered. In writing if they're expensive. Rent on the 1st. Coffee when you make too much." Celia's eyes shone, but she did not cry. "That one isn't in the lease. House rule." Saturday's dinner filled both apartments. Eric cooked in Celia's kitchen because he had designed it and wanted to prove the trash bin was correctly placed. He made pot roast in a borrowed Dutch oven, mashed potatoes and green beans with too much garlic. Celia objected to having her home used as a test kitchen until she tasted the gravy. Sam brought rolls. Carla brought beer. Mark arrived carrying 2 folding chairs, while Denise carried 4 and a lemon cake. "You listened," Ruth said. "I'm trying a new thing." They set the downstairs round table against the wall and added a borrowed card table. Nothing matched. Mavis's mug held 3 late peony blossoms Celia had bought from a florist because their transplanted roots would not bloom again until spring. Eric stood at the stove in a clean shirt, tasting the gravy from a wooden spoon. He had signed the lease for his apartment that morning. "You have enough furniture?" Ruth asked. "I have a bed, a desk, and the chair from the restaurant office." "That chair leans. I've adjusted to bad furniture." Walter looked at Ruth. Family trait. Eric would move the next day. The knowledge sat beneath dinner, both relief and loss. His stay had lasted 4 months, long enough for his cereal to become part of the grocery list, and his late steps in the hall to stop waking Ruth. He had paid every month and completed more work hours than their agreement required. He and Dana were meeting for coffee occasionally, though neither called it reconciliation. At the table, Walter raised his glass. "To the people who knew more than we did." "That's a large group," Sam said. "To the people who came anyway," Walter continued. They drank. Denise smiled, but Ruth saw her waiting. It was the same expression she wore when a client entered a room she had arranged and failed to notice the correct detail. After dessert, Denise found her opening. "Bellstone called me yesterday," she said. Walter set down his fork. "They know the property passed. They're prepared to make an offer above the corner sale." Eric looked at her. "Tonight, I'm sharing information. You brought cake with it. I did not arrange the call." "No," Ruth said, "but you arranged the announcement." Mark stared at his empty plate. Denise's cheeks reddened. "I thought you would want to know that what you did increased the value significantly." Celia folded her napkin. "Value to whom? To any owner? I'm an owner of my frying pan. It's worth more to me when dinner is in it." Denise turned to Ruth. "This is what I mean. Every practical question becomes an accusation, because you keep asking the same question after we answer. I helped too." "Yes, you did. I found the moving company. I drove Dad to therapy, I brought supplies, I picked up the hinge that kept this place from failing." Walter said gently, "It was one item on a 7-item list. That is not the point." Ruth understood then. Denise did not want the house sold only for the money. She wanted the ending reorganized until her early judgment became concern, her pressure became motivation, and the Mercers' success reflected well on her care. "You helped with the hinge," Ruth said. "You did not make us buy the house. I never said I did. You keep reaching for credit because an apology feels like losing." Denise stood. The folding chair scraped the floor. "I apologized to Celia." "You did," Celia said. "It was a good apology." Denise looked less comforted than Celia intended. Eric pushed his plate aside. "Sit down, Denise. Easy for you. You got a room and 4 months to rebuild your life. I paid rent at a family rate and worked. You always get to be the disaster everyone gathers around." Eric's face hardened. "At least I stopped pretending my disaster was an investment opportunity." Walter stood between them. Enough. The word landed with the old authority he rarely used. Everyone went quiet. "This house was not built so the two of you could divide it while we're eating," he said. Ruth touched his arm. "Let me talk to her." She led Denise upstairs. In the kitchen, Ruth removed her keyring from her purse. There were keys to the duplex, the storage unit, the mailbox, and a small silver key with a blue plastic cap. Denise recognized it. "That's my house key. You gave it to me after you and Mark moved in, for emergencies and deliveries, plants, letting workers in, setting up before you came home." Denise looked at the key in Ruth's palm. "Why are you giving it back?" "Because I don't need a place to be stored." Pain crossed Denise's face. "You've been saving that line. I've been living it. That guest room offer was a mistake. How many times do I have to pay for it? This isn't payment. It feels like punishment." Ruth set the key on the counter between them. "If I come to your house, I want you to open the door. I don't want access because I'm useful. And I don't want you offering me a bed because you've decided my own choices are finished." Denise looked toward the stairs. Laughter rose from below. Sam had said something Carla found funnier than it deserved. "You have all these people now," Denise said. "We have always had people. Not like this. No, not like this." Denise touched the blue plastic cap, but did not pick it up. "You don't need me." Ruth's anger softened around the truth beneath the sentence. "I needed you to respect me," she said. "You kept offering management. That's how I help." "I know. What am I supposed to do instead?" "Come for dinner, bring chairs, ask before you arrange the room." Denise laughed once through her nose. "You hated the chairs. They pinched. I brought the wrong chairs. They were free. I survived." Denise picked up the key. "I still think refusing Bellstone without hearing the number is irresponsible," she said. "I know, and I think you should let me run the numbers on Celia's rent." "No." Denise nodded tightly. Progress, Ruth saw, was not the same as transformation. They returned downstairs. Denise finished her cake and did not mention Bellstone again. When she and Mark left, she hugged Walter, then Ruth. The embrace remained stiff, but she did not take the lemon cake home. Eric moved out the next morning. He packed his duffel bags into a used sedan and carried the freezer motor downstairs, then changed his mind and left it on Walter's workbench. "For the shop," he said. "You paid Sam to rebuild it," Walter replied. "I paid him in restaurant credit he never used. You owe him lunch. So do you." Eric placed his house key on the kitchen table. Ruth pushed it back. "Keep the front door key. I'm not a tenant anymore." "No. You're invited." He closed his fingers around it. At the curb, he lowered the mailbox flag after placing his forwarding form inside for the carrier. Walter adjusted the post, though it was already straight. Eric hugged him with care around the repaired shoulder. Then he hugged Ruth. "You're going to check my apartment, aren't you?" he asked. "Only if you invite me." He searched her face. "I'm improving too," she said. After he drove away, the spare room felt enormous. The duplex settled into ordinary life. Celia's radio played downstairs in the mornings. Rent arrived on the 1st. Walter returned to Sam's shop 2 days a week, accepting money instead of trading every hour away. Ruth began putting a small amount aside for travel, though Walter circled Nebraska before South Dakota in the atlas. Winter loosened its grip. The transplanted peonies went back into the soil along the fence. Celia warned that divided roots sometimes took a year to recover. Denise did not visit for several weeks. Then, on a cool Saturday morning, Ruth found her standing beside the mailbox in old jeans and plain work shoes. No folder, no cake, no stage basket of supplies. "I didn't know if I should come up," Denise said. "You know the address. That isn't the same as being invited." Ruth opened the gate. They sat on the porch with coffee. Denise held the mug in both hands and watched Walter and Celia argue over the spacing of the peonies. "I don't know how to belong to your life if I'm not helping run it," she said. Ruth looked at her daughter's profile. "I don't know how to ask for help without surrendering." Denise nodded. "That sounds inconvenient. It has been." After coffee, Ruth handed her a garden fork. They worked near the mailbox, loosening soil around one of the divided peony roots. Denise asked twice how deep it should go, and waited for the answer both times. When the root was covered, she pressed the earth carefully around it. "Is that enough?" she asked. Ruth looked at the small red shoots, the green mailbox, and the brass numbers Walter had cleaned again that morning. "Don't crowd it," she said. "Give it room." Denise sat back on her heels. Together, they left it there.